I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. I got love, peace, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got joy and pain and joy inside my DNA.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, Fanfic Fantasy. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today, we're kicking off the fourth part of our series, What if Issei had level up system with multiple boosted gears and had harem? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is SeerKing from ff.net. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. Chapter 15, Attack of the Purifiers. Streets of Kuo Town. You've got to be kidding me, Issei muttered, one eyebrow twitching madly. This is the entrance to the first dungeon. His travels had taken him to a dilapidated building with a sign above the door proudly declaring Mankainko Gaming Systems, ESD, 1997 in dirty and discolored letters. The small two-story building looked like it hadn't seen an ounce of care in at least a few years, if not a full decade, and was covered in either chipped paint or festooned with graffiti. The main entrance was boarded shut and the windows on the ground floor were broken and blocked by large planks of plywood. Issei couldn't see the second-story windows, but he guessed they were the same. Whatever spirit or intelligence is inside the gaming gear has a very weird sense of humor, the Sekyude thought with a scowl. This has to be the most idiotic place to have the entrance to a dungeon. There's just no way that there's one here, right? Sadly, if Issei's time playing video games and watching anime had taught him anything, it was that there were a lot of ways to hide something in plain sight. Spatial pockets, alternate dimensions, bent space ... The list went on. He wasn't sure if that applied to real magic and he was still getting used to that idea, but he wasn't willing to rule it out just yet. Hell, for all he knew, some of the anime, manga, and gaming companies out there were owned by real supernaturals and they used their magic as inspiration or a template or something. Since there was no way for something like an actual physical dungeon to be hidden in the city proper, that meant that there was likely something along those lines coming into play here. Taking a quick look around, the dual sacred gear wielder let out a slight sigh of relief when he noticed no one around. In fact, it looked like the entire street had been abandoned for a while, all the businesses mirroring the small gaming company in various levels. If Issei were to judge, he'd bet that they'd all closed down at roughly the same time, within a couple of years of the Mankainko company at least. That in and of itself was rather suspicious and, more than that, even if the street was located in the rougher section of Kuo Town, it was incredibly suspicious that an entire street would be abandoned for the better part of a decade without anyone moving in. Property in a city the size of Kuo was fairly valuable after all, and he was sure someone would have tried to reinvigorate the neighborhood or something by now. There was definitely something supernatural going on here, and Issei was willing to bet his porn he was going to be falling face first into the middle of it. Getting inside the building itself wasn't an issue. The plywood blocking the windows was already half rotted. A quick solid blow from a power strike enhanced fist shattered it into splinters, and a swipe from the same cleared any broken glass remaining on the window itself. If anyone even noticed it, they'd likely attribute it to either teenage vandalism, which it kinda sorta was, or some homeless person breaking in to scavenge or sleep. Now it was just a matter of finding the dungeon entrance. Scattered all over the two-story building were the remnants of the small game soft company, which had worked on PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games from what Issei could tell from the moldering posters decorating the walls. He collected what few parts looked to be valuable or useful as he went, mostly because he was completely tapped out money-wise thanks to purchasing his base core and his magic signature concealing cloak. The ground floor was a bust aside from the odd knick-knack here and there, so Issei cautiously headed up the stairs to the second floor. His caution had less to do than any fear of an ambush by monsters or some other threat, and more with his worries that the stairs or floor might collapse beneath him or even the entire building falling down around his ears. Whoever had built this place had obviously gone for the cheapest options available, and he really didn't want to see if his HP would survive having a building drop on top of him. "Hello, what do we have here?" Issei muttered as he stepped into the last room of the building, which was the company manager's office. Carved into the floor in front of the desk was a magic circle, with odd script written around the circumference. Well, looks like some genius decided to mess with magic and ended up winning themselves a Darwin Award. Why say that? Because the dried-up corpse of a man wearing a ragged business suit sat against the front of the desk. Clutched in his right hand was a dagger of some sort, while a thick book was on the floor under where the shriveled remnants of his left arm hung. Issei quickly used observe on both of them to make sure they weren't cursed or something. Cheap steel imitation Athame. a mass-produced and rather poorly made version of an athame, a ritual dagger used in pagan rituals. Despite being made from an alloy, which actually diffuses gathered magical energy past a certain point, this item can still act as a fully functional casting implement, albeit a rather poor one. Durability 41/100th, slashing damage 25, piercing damage S, bludgeoning damage 10. Abilities: casting implement, MP diffusion. Cheap and badly made grimoire. A grimoire is a book of magic, usually made from thick parchment and covered with stout leather. This one isn't. Fashioned from A4 paper and covered in plastic. Any mystical qualities that this book could possess are severely dampened as a result, and anything written within is suspect as a result of the dubious nature of its maker's knowledge. Durability 5/50th. This guy was a wannabe magician, wasn't he? Issei mumbled to himself as he not so gently removed both the dagger and the grimoire from the corpse's hands and stowed them in his inventory. He wasn't sure if he could use the dagger, but he was definitely getting rid of the grimoire as soon as he could. Even if it wasn't evil, the description alone made him sure it was more of a hindrance if not an outright threat to any attempts to learn magic. Issei hummed slightly as he ran through his own limited knowledge of magic to try and figure out what happened here. It looks like he was trying to use some kind of ritual, but I'm willing to bet that he didn't have enough MP to do it alone. When his MP was fully drained, the ritual must have tried to use his life force as a power source. Issei couldn't help but shake his head at the poor, mummified idiot. Poor bastard, what a way to go. Running low on MP wasn't a fun experience, he could tell you that from personal experience. Being drained completely, and then having your HP drained as well must have been agonizing. The guy might have been a complete idiot for attempting to use a magical ritual on his own like this, but that didn't mean he deserved to die in agony like that. Looking around the rest of the office, and ignoring the very obvious magic circle for the moment, Issei managed to find 30,000 yen in one of the drawers, which was useful, as well as a whole drawer full of dubiously mystical bric-a-brac that he decided to go through in more detail later to see what could possibly be useful, and what would be joining the grimoire in being sold to the store. Seriously, there was an actual dribbly candle in amongst all of it. Finally looking at the magic circle properly, Issei spotted a very obvious come pick me up and get teleported who knows where sheet of paper in the center of the circle. Seriously, this was practically a cliché. Okay, why not just walk into it? Issei mused. A trap that you know is a trap isn't really a trap anymore, right? Besides, it wasn't as if he had any other way of entering the dungeon. With a few swipes on his window, Issei changed into his armor and cloak, as well as equipping his sword breaker. As this was against mages presumably, he wouldn't try to train his fist fighting skills against them. Magic beats fists in terms of range. Instead, he was going to focus on leveling up his new sapphire blade ability. Given that Issei was about to enter a level 15 dungeon and the sword gauntlet was only LV0, scoring the killing blow against a single enemy should level it up to LV5 or more right away. This was also a smart plan due to the fact that the durability of Sapphire Blade was low. As in I can't believe that a blade made out of magical crystal is so brittle low. Issei honestly hoped that the damned blade would be worth it. Otherwise the points he'd invested into it would be wasted on a weapon that was only useful as a last resort. Sapphire Blade, he called out, bringing the gamer's gear to life on his arm. Azure Edge. From the back of the blue gauntlet, a long spike of crystalline material seemed to sprout, growing into a narrow blade before his very eyes and gleaming even in the dim light. Issei had to admit, even if its stats kinda sucked at the moment, it still looked fairly neat. Now fully armed, Issei stepped onto the magic circle, which promptly started glowing to blinding levels, forcing him to cover his eyes. When he uncovered them, he was in a circular room built from tan stones, with a moderately large double door in front of him. Carved into both doors. Is that a bell? The Sekiryude blinked. It certainly looked like a bell. Not only that, it was mounted on a snowflake that looked really familiar for some reason. Issei was jolted out of his reverie by the appearance of another window in front of him. Welcome, you have entered your first true dungeon. Well, sort of. This is a pseudo-natural dungeon, created by the half-assed, incomplete and stupidly executed ritual of Kinoshita Rentaro. Rather than simply killing him and imploding and possibly taking half the block with it, the ritual, which he designed by slapping multiple traditions and spells together and hoping without much evidence to support it that it would work, used elements of the pirate games he was copying on the side to create this dungeon, based on one particular set of enemies that it chose at random. And people say that ironic karma doesn't exist. You can only enter this dungeon 4 times, and you cannot leave the dungeon without defeating a floor boss. After you defeat one, you are given the chance to leave. If you choose to stay, you cannot leave until you defeat another floor boss. A fair warning, if you leave the dungeon, all of the enemies inside of it will respawn and go up by 1 level. This will happen every time you leave. Fortunately for you, there are only 4 floors in the dungeon, so it shouldn't be too hard to clear it. Right? Suspicious. This couldn't be any more suspicious if it tried. Issei declared flatly. Also, is it just me or was that a bit more conversational than all the other notifications that I've seen? Deciding that if things got really tough, he'd switch back to his gladius. The Seirkyude advanced to the door and nudged it with 1 foot, letting it swing open, revealing a corridor that led up to a corner. The entire complex seemed to be lit by glowing stones embedded into the walls at set intervals. Well, this is suitable eerie, Issei muttered before slowly advancing down the corridor. He could tell that there were no traps in the corridor, at least none that his necklace could detect, but that didn't mean he wasn't going to be cautious. An ounce of paranoia can save a boatload of effort or something like that. As soon as he approached the corner, a magic circle flashed into existence and made an enemy appear, one that Issei knew all too well from his forays into RPGs. Standing about the same height as Issei, wearing a purple coat with white gloves and trousers, with a pointed straw hat on its head and only a pair of glowing eyes visible. It was Black Mage type a number 567 LV15. Soulless doll. Damn you Rintaro for trying to pirate Final Fantasy IX. The gamer cursed angrily. Know some shame, you bastard. I take back my pity. How dare the stupid bastard try and pirate his favorite Final Fantasy title. Now he was going to be forced to massacre his way through some of his favorite characters. He just knew it. Kill. The cloth automaton rumbled as it raised its hands to cast a spell. Fortunately, Issei had done quite a bit of grinding in Gizameluk's grotto and the suburbs of Burmecia, so he knew very well the 4 attacks of type of black mages: strike, fire, blizzard, and thunder. And he was in no hurry to find out what being on the receiving end of any of those spells would feel like. Learn them? Yes. Hopefully that would be a reward from the boss fight or even a random loot drop. Lesser barrier shield. Issei shouted, the barrier appearing just as a pair of grapefruit-sized fireballs shot out from the hands of the black mage and lanced down the corridor to strike it. Fortunately, his shield was at a level that, while cracked badly from the impacts, it was strong enough to withstand the spell. Even as the fire spell slammed into his shield, Issei was already running forward. The worst thing to do when fighting a wizard-type opponent was to let them keep their space close in, where they had trouble using their magic without hurting themselves unless they were a lunatic like Teaksqueak the Warped Warlock Engineer, and you'd have every advantage you could need to take them down. Granted, that hadn't been possible in FFIX, but hopefully the logic would prove itself applicable in a real-world situation. Magic weapon reinforcement, he chanted under his breath, making both his sword breaker and sapphire blade glow red with his magic. Kill, the black mage repeated and this time shot a blast of lightning at him. The shield managed to absorb the entire blast before it finally shattered, which gave Issei time enough to dart in and stab both of his weapons into the face of the black mage. It jerked a couple of times before the arms fell to its side limply. You have slain Black Mage Type A. You receive 1002 EXP. Lesser Barrier Shield has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Magic Weapon Reinforcement has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Sapphire Blade has leveled up. LV0 LV1. Skill not generated. Sapphire Blade has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Skill generated. Sapphire Blade has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Skill not generated. Sapphire Blade has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Skill generated. Sapphire Blade has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Skill automatically generated. Sapphire Blade has gained the skill Heart of the Earth. Sapphire Blade has gained the skill Rapid Evolution. Sapphire Blade has gained the skill Magic Reinforcement. Heart of the Earth passive LVMAX. The Sapphire Blade now possesses the unyielding strength of the Earth, increasing its durability by half per level gained. Rapid Evolution passive LVMAX. Due to gaining so many levels at once in its first outing, the Sapphire Blade now absorbs EXP at a far greater rate than before, adding a quarter more EXP to that which it would normally gain. Magic Reinforcement passive LVMAX. Exposed to its master's spell of reinforcement during its first outing in combat, the Sapphire Blade will use the ambient magical energy around it to passively increase its own durability and attack power, +10 and +20 respectively. Okay, this is gonna kick ass. Issei smirked. Evidently, the skills that were generated upon leveling up the sapphire blade were influenced by the spells he used and the way he used the blade itself. A literal evolving blade that became stronger and became more useful the more you used it. That little ability was practically a sacred gear in and of itself in Issei's humble opinion. What worried him slightly was the fact his enemies were, essentially, golems, unthinking beyond orders to attack their enemy, unfeeling, relentless and all but unstoppable in large enough numbers against conventional enemies. Unlike with the ratmen, he couldn't use their sense of pain to distract them or make them flinch, nor would intimidation or other psychological and mental attacks likely work on them. Just about the only ones that might be affected by any of that were, ironically, the 3 strongest black mages, the Black Waltzes, specifically tuned to be masters of an element and imbued with power and intelligence far exceeding their lesser brethren. The Black Waltzes had been serious powerhouses in the early game of FFIX, and they were likely the first, second, and third floor bosses respectively. The 4th floor did worry him somewhat, as there were only 3 Black Waltz units. Black Waltz number 3 had been fought twice at different points in the game, so it was an unknown mystery as to what that boss would be, so business as usual there, anyway. Then a sudden horrifying thought made itself known. Please, please don't make me fight Vivi. He prayed to whoever happened to be listening. I don't think I could kill the little guy. He was such an awesome character. Granted, Issei, being the pervert that he was even at a young age, had always liked characters like Garnet Bishojo Princess for the win, Aiko Lowly Goodness, Freya Tomboy Beast Girl Appeal and Beatrix the Lovely Lady Knight. But the tiny magic caster had still been a cool character. He refused to acknowledge Quina Quen as female ... That thing was no woman. It didn't even have oppai. Forcing such terrible thoughts away, Issei pushed the loot button only to grimace. The loot wasn't all that spectacular, just a small amount of yen and a black mage pointed hat, which Issei decided to keep as a memento. Still, this was decent grinding, if nothing else. The fact that the black mages were basically walking glass cannons would actually make this easier than he had initially thought. Also, the type A's, B's, and C's were pretty obvious to recognize on sight, as the black mages got steadily more ornate in appearance as they became more powerful. This made threat assessment very easy. Advancing down the corridor, Issei dealt with 3 more black mage type A enemies and the sapphire blade leveled up twice more, although no new skills came from it. Coming across a treasure chest had him suspicious, but when he opened it, it revealed a part of a rolled up scroll, fragment of Black Mage Blueprints number 1. There were, apparently, 5 fragments to find, and once assembled, he would be able to make black mages himself once he offered it to his dungeon core. As that was all kinds of awesome, Issei began to look more carefully for hidden compartments and secret areas. Final Fantasy games were very fond of puzzles that needed to be solved to either progress forward or to unlock secret areas full of goodies, and since this whole dungeon was based on a pirated version of FFIX, that should still hold true here. He found another fragment number 3 in another chest, but mostly had to deal with the occasional attack of black mage type A's. Eventually though, he reached the second to last room of the first floor and was confronted with something he'd been expecting, a puzzle. It was a round room with a single ring around the top, with a pair of orbs mounted on it, as well as a pair of brackets on 2 particular parts of the wall. In the middle of the room was a dais atop of which was a small control panel with some knobs and levers on it. At the opposite side of the room was a large door that looked very solid and immovable despite it only being made of wood. What is this, Uncharted 4 or Final Fantasy IX? Make your mind up, Issei muttered, recognizing the room as a downsized import of a particular puzzle from the PS4 game. Walking up to the dais, he crouched down and saw that the dais was essentially a large pressure plate. Once he stood on it, a mechanism would activate, probably one that would give him a hint as to what the answer to the puzzle was, as well as possibly a trap that would activate if he failed or stepped off of the dais before the puzzle was solved. Just lovely. Stepping onto it, Issei staggered slightly as the dais sunk with a mechanical grinding sound, making 2 plates on the wall to open up, each above one of the pairs of brackets, which then lit up. One was a bell, while the other was a snowflake, a symbol for ice magic, a test of knowledge for Final Fantasy IX fans. The gamer grinned to himself. How appropriate. Moving to the center of the dais, Issei found that he could see the symbols on each orb. One had a crescent moon-tipped staff, while the other bore a flame symbol. The staff is from number 3, while the flame is the magic most used by number 2, Su. Issei mused aloud as he eyed the control panel. There were 2 knobs at the top, with a third at the bottom. If he was a betting man, Reaching out, he twisted the top left hand one, which rotated the staff orb around, revealing a horn-pointed hat on the quarter that it turned to. Another twist revealed a blank spot, while a final twist revealed the bell symbol. Satisfied with that, Issei turned the opposite knob, switching the right hand orb from fire to lightning, to blank, and finally the snowflake symbol that he was looking for. Getting the ring around to slot the two orbs into place over their respective brackets took a bit of finesse, but Issei eventually managed to get them in place. With a mechanical click, the dais popped back up to its former height, and a small figurine appeared in front of the gamer, floating in midair. Black Waltz No. 1 statuette. A small statue of the winged black mage ruler of the blizzard. Cool. Issei nodded as he grabbed it and placed the knick-knack in his inventory. Another souvenir for his base. As soon as the statuette vanished, the large door on the far side of the room sunk into the ground, releasing a chill into the room as ice and snow were revealed on the other side of the portal, making Issei shiver. Yeah, time to do some shopping, he muttered as he opened the store. He'd earned enough yen cutting through the black mages to afford a new trinket to deal with this. A few minutes later, he was wearing a belt that maintained his body temperature at a slightly warm one regardless of the temperature around him. He didn't want to risk possibly getting frostbite and gangrene. Thank you very much. Granted, it would do exactly jack squat against ice spells or fire spells, but not freezing his privates off was the main goal here. He still had plans for them, after all. Now inured to the icy cold waves of air emanating from the presumptive boss room, Issei debated with himself for a moment before deactivating Sapphire Blade and drawing out his Blood Metal Gladius in its place. There was a time and a place for training his weaker skills, and staring down a floor boss wasn't one of them. Advancing into the room, the sheer amount of ice and snow made the Sekiryude shiver. If he hadn't thought to buy the belt of temperate temperature, he'd have either been an ice cube already or at the very least going numb all over, which would have not helped in any kind of fight. Zidane Tribal was earning his respect all over again for fighting with pure willpower in these conditions. Ding. Pausing in the middle of the ballroom-sized room, Issei cocked his head to the side at the sound of a bell chiming. Looking around, he narrowed his eyes at the high galleries of ice that surrounded him. The Black Waltz had appeared from a height in the game, so that wasn't likely to change here. Ding. Why aren't you dead? This cold snap of mine should have frozen you down to your very bones. A chilly voice asked from his front. Issei turned and held himself ready as his enemy finally showed itself atop a large menhir of ice. With a pair of dark purple wings emerged from its hunched back, the Black Waltz was actually shorter than Issei himself was. The pointed hat atop its head was tied near the point, and it wore a pair of trousers with a snowflake symbol on each leg. Clasped in its right hand was a golden bell, dangling from a red string. This was its casting device. Black Waltz No. 1 LV-17. Winged Black Mage of the Blizzard. Yes, sorry, but I'm here to take you down, Issei said, pointing his Gladius at the boss. You can try. The Black Waltz replied before ringing its bell again. Ding. Fireball, Issei shouted, firing a spell off immediately. The fiery projectile arced up towards the Black Waltz, who shook his bell at it. Blizzard. The Black Mage replied coolly, sending an equally large ice crystal at the approaching spell, cancelling it out. Taking flight, the boss hovered next to his former pedestal and started to cast a spell. Ice Giant, Sea Lion, come before me, the Black Waltz chanted. In an explosion of ice, the massive form of his summoned monster appeared in the place of the large ice crystal, an immense giant seal made of ice. With a bone mask resembling a walrus face, a pair of large wings with razor-sharp icicle feathers, and two tails, Sea Lion roared proudly as it appeared. Sea Lion LV-18. Beast of the Tundra. Go, Sea Lion. Freeze him to death. Black Waltz No. 1 ordered. Oh hell, Issei grimaced beneath his helmet. This was exactly like in the boss battle. Attacking Sea Lion first was pointless, because the Black Waltz would just use Blizzard to heal it. That meant that he had to deal with the flying menace first. Burning Bomb. Issei pointed both of his weapons at the Black Waltz, firing off a pair of fireballs at his enemy. They detonated when they drew near to the boss, bathing him in flames that made it shriek in pain. Curse you, fire. The automaton cursed before casting a spell at him while the Sea Lion launched a blizzard at him at the same time. Dodging both the fireball and icicle, the Sekiryude started to run forward towards the Black Waltz. Hopefully, if he managed to kill the summoner, the summon would vanish. If not, then at least he'd be down to a single threat. Channeling MP into his legs, Issei leapt up with a shout, closing on the Black Waltz in an instant, making the slitted white eyes of the cloth golem widen in shock. Let's take you down to earth, Issei growled before lashing out with a kick that spun the black waltz around so its wings faced him. He then used magic weapon reinforcement on his weapons and cut off both wings with a pair of strong downward strokes, sending the spellcaster tumbling to the ground. Issei used the boss's tumbling form as a springboard as it fell and not incidentally launching it into the ground with even more force to alter direction towards Sea Lion. Even as the massive construct drew back a wing to slice at him, the soaring boy drew back an arm and shouted, "Power strike." The glow around Issei's right-hand weapon redoubled in strength, and when he sliced down with his blood metal gladius, it left a long crevasse down the front of Sea Lion. It also had the effect of nullifying a great degree of Issei's momentum, allowing him to flip around the underside of the sea lion's chest and slide down the back of its tail. Whoa, what a rush. The gamer cheered as he leapt away from Sea Lion's body before he reached the thrashing tails and started running towards where the black waltz had crash-landed and was currently struggling to its feet, seething with anger. You. It seemed so angry that words failed it. Yes? Issei asked faux innocently. Rawhag. The black waltz roared, sending a spell, which looked to be the upgraded version of the basic fire spell, Fira, at Issei. Rather than a flaming ball, the spell manifested as a raging stream of fire that instantly melted and boiled the ice and snow in and around its path. Once more using a magically assisted leap, this time to avoid an attack, the Seirking flew towards the black waltz and stabbed it through the heart with his primary weapon, swiftly followed by the sword breaker going into its throat. Gah, as Sea Lion, kill him for me. The black waltz gurgled before Issei ripped his swords out of him and allowed the boss to collapse to the ground and vanish. Turning his attention back to Sea Lion, Issei was pleasantly surprised to see that the orb in its chest, which showed its general level of HP, was at yellow instead of green, which meant it was down to around half of its HP. Evidently, combining Power Strike and magical weapon reinforcement into a single attack was highly effective when combined with the strength he had gained as he leveled up. Sea Lion roared in fury as its master faded away and charged at the gamer with the intent to squash him flat. Issei had no intentions of meeting the hulking monster head-on. Instead, he tried channeling a steady stream of MP to his legs, which resulted in him moving faster as he ran away from the summoned beast and around the room, leading it on a merry little chase, occasionally turning to launch fireballs at the lumbering sea lion whenever he had an acceptable amount of distance. The large summon had responded by spamming blizzards at him furiously. As another fireball slammed into the monster's head, the orb decorating its chest flashed from yellow to red. That was a bad sign for him, since it meant that Sea Lion now had access to its special magical spell, Tsunami. It was a half-assed version of the Summon Leviathan's own attack, but it was still one that Issei could rightly call an AoE spell. Dodging wouldn't do him any good against it, as it swept the area in front of Sea Lion with a large wave of ice-cold water. Defending wouldn't do much against it either, as it was doubtful that a single lesser barrier shield, or even multiples thereof, could entirely stop the tidal wave. When you can't run or defend, there was only one option: attack. Quickly changing direction, Issei started leaping up the walls of ice to one side until reaching a height that was about half again as tall as Sea Lion, whereupon he kicked off the wall and shot at the lumbering brute like a cannonball. Sea Lion was in the middle of skidding to a halt and was thus unprepared for Issei to slam into it, embedding his sword breaker into its head like a piton to keep himself steady as he raised his blood metal gladius in a reverse grip. Power strike, Issei shouted, stabbing the weapon down into the top of the sea lion's skull-like mask, which shattered like glass under the strength of the strike. The ice beast roared, thrashed, and, finally, slammed down onto the ground, dissolving into motes of white light. That was a bit more hair-raising than I was expecting. The gamer muttered as he stood up. Wait, what the? As soon as he stood up, a blaring musical piece started to play in the room that anyone who'd played any Final Fantasy game would recognize. The victory jingle. Specifically the one composed for FFIX. Issei's sweat dropped at the music as a screen popped open in front of him. Congratulations. You have defeated Black Waltz number 1. You receive 1650 EXP. Congratulations. You have defeated Sea Lion. You receive 15 EXP. For defeating Black Waltz number 1, you receive Lesser Bell of the Blizzard and Blizzard Spellbook. For defeating Sea Lion, you receive Sea Lion Statuette and Sea Lion Scale Cuirass. You have leveled up. LV17 LV18. You have 5 AP to spend. For fighting and defeating a boss by the book, you earn 6 SGP out of 6 SGP. As a result of a specific action, the skill Power Leap has been created. Power Leap Instant LV1, 0%. In a manner of speaking, this is a sister skill to Power Strike. As opposed to that skill, however, this skill is exclusively used with the legs. By channeling mana into them and releasing it in a single burst, the user can vastly increase the height and distance that they can jump. Costs between 10 and 50 MP to use. The distance and/or height that the user jumps is determined by the amount of MP the user adds to it. As a result of a specific action, the skill Basic Magic Body Enhancement has been created. Basic Magic Body Enhancement active LV1 0%. One of the most basic spells of the reinforcement magic list. This spell increases the user's physical condition and abilities by a small amount while active. One should always learn this spell before any other reinforcement magic. Costs 10 MP minute to be active. Increases STR, STA and Dex by 1 point while active. Increases the effect of other basic reinforcement magic spells by +1 while active. As a result of continuous actions, the skill Basic Reinforcement Magic has been created. Basic Reinforcement Magic passive LV1 0%. While most magic users like to stand from a distance and bombard their enemies with spells, others like to get up close and personal. To that end, they use magic to increase the capabilities of their body. That is the basic principle of reinforcement magic. All reinforcement magic spells are now assigned a tier. Access to Tier 0 and Tier 1 spells opened. Ambidextrous has leveled up. LV7 LV8. Basic Swordsmanship has leveled up. LV8 LV9. Short Sword Mastery has leveled up. LV8 LV9. Fireball has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Burning Bomb has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Power Strike has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Magic Weapon Reinforcement has leveled up. LV6 LV7. As a result of acquiring Lesser Fire Magic, Basic Reinforcement Magic, Lesser Earth Magic, Lifestyle Magic and Defensive Magic, you have earned the title of Apprentice Mage. That last one was unexpected. But I guess it's because I unlocked 5 different types of magic. Issei muttered. It made too much sense to be anything other than that. Congratulations. You have defeated the Floor 1 boss. Do you wish to leave now? Warning. Should you leave, the monsters you have slain shall respawn and level up by 1 level. Yeah, I think that's enough for tonight. The Sekiryude muttered, hitting the Y key. The room blurred around him and he suddenly found himself on the ground floor of the dilapidated building he'd entered before. Why he wasn't back in the office, he couldn't tell. Time to go home ... and get some rest, he muttered, heading for the window he'd used to enter the building in the first place. Maybe take tomorrow off from grinding my levels and work on skill grinding some of my lower level skills. Having skills was all very well, but training those skills was also important. Weak skills aren't any use in combat against serious enemies. Fortunately, his skills gained experience just by being used, not restricted to being used in combat. His parents were going on a trip to a spa that his dad had won in a lottery the next day, which meant that he could spend the day with Bronze Skin and Force Reduction Field on to train them. Satisfied with his decision, he headed off home. 2 days later, Huo Park. Asia Argento, formerly a holy maiden of the Catholic Church, walked down the pavement towards where she had promised to meet her benefactor, Hyoto Issei-san. The last day and a half had been tough, to say the least. Not that every day since being exiled from the church in Rome hadn't been tough, but Father Free ... he scares me. The blonde girl shivered. The insane and often inane ramblings of the rogue exorcist unnerved her to the point that she tried to stay on the opposite side of the room from the man. Additionally, Donaseek and Calawarner, 2 of the fallen angels, were dismissive and cruel towards her. Rainier and Midalt, while not cruel, were similarly dismissive towards her. They also didn't stop their companions from being cruel to her. This had meant that the promise of seeing the one person in Japan who had been kind towards her had been something of a lifeline for the poor Italian blonde, something to keep her spirits up over the rough day she'd had. Asia, a familiar voice called from ahead of her. Asia looked up and brightened immediately as she saw Issei standing there waving at her. He was wearing a uniform of some sort. A school uniform, perhaps. Asia had been raised in a church-sponsored orphanage and had moved from there to the nunnery as soon as she had awoken her sacred gear where she'd taken her vows and received a basic education, so she'd never seen a school uniform before. Issei-san, she called back and eagerly moved towards him ... only to trip and fall over a small rock on the pavement. Luckily, Issei managed to catch her before she could fall again. You okay, Asia? He asked as he steadied her on her feet. Oh, why yes, I'm fine, she stammered, face pinking at his hold on her. She was greatly unused to males, having lived in a nunnery and only encountering males as either priests or patients up until her exile. And just clumsy. Issei just chuckled and let her go once she'd gotten her bearings. As long as you're not hurt, that's fine. So, how has your time at your new church been? Asia flinched slightly at that. That bad, huh? Issei said sympathetically. Look, let me treat you to something to eat. You look as if you could use a good meal. The blonde girl flushed. She hadn't actually eaten since breakfast, and it hadn't been much of a breakfast at that. If it isn't a bother to you, Issei-san. It's fine. The boy grinned. How does a hamburger sound? Later, it was fun being with Issei-san. Asia hadn't enjoyed herself so much since she first started to pray to the Lord and received his blessing. The trip to the fast food shop had been interesting, and the food tasted nice as well. Then there was the arcade. So many interesting games and gimmicks. Asia hadn't heard of most of them, but thanks to her language comprehension spell being active and Issei-san's explanations, she was able to have fun. Issei-san had even won a small silver necklace for her in a claw game of some sort. While nuns were supposed to be above the acquisition of worldly items, Asia couldn't help but treasure it as a gift from her first real friend. Everyone who she had known in Rome had turned their backs on her and cast her out, and she was adrift in the world, with only the vague promises of the fallen to cling to. Having a physical, tangible item from someone who was kind to her meant almost as much to her as the symbol of the Lord that she wore around her neck. Now they were back in the park, where Issei-san was clearly building up the nerve to ask her about the church. He'd had a bad feeling about it and was concerned for her due to the reaction she'd shown to his question earlier. Asia knew that she couldn't very well tell him about the world of the supernatural, but she also didn't want to lie to him. Oh, what to do? The nun started and let out a squeak as the sky suddenly turned red, with all the sounds of the city and wildlife vanishing in an instant. Issei-san also looked grim. What's going on? Asia asked worriedly, her eyes darting all over the scenery. Someone's activated a magic item to put us in a separate dimension. Issei said grimly, voice low. Asia turned to look at him in shock. I don't know how it activated without us noticing anything, but we're pretty much cut off from reality. What do you mean? The nun asked. This space is kinda like a temporary space, copied from reality, but not actually real. The boy explained. While here, any damage done to the surroundings won't affect their real counterparts back in reality, and once the device runs out of magical power, this world will collapse. How do you? Asia asked softly, dreading the answer. Was he from the devils to tempt her over to them? I'm an independent and unaffiliated magic user, so I have some knowledge of these things. Issei explained. And I can only think of one group who would use this kind of thing. The Purifiers. One part of Asia was deeply relieved that her first real friend wasn't a part of the devil's temptation, while another part, the part that had listened to the sermons about pagan magic users, was mildly worried. Purifiers? She asked with a blink of her innocent eyes. Pro-human supremacists who hate anything and everything that has to do with the supernatural, no matter what side it's on. Issei explained. Not only that, they also despise humans who have supernatural powers, like magicians, half-bloods, and sacred gear users. The fact that we're the only ones caught like this means that either one or both of us are their targets. How can they turn their ire on the Lord and his angels? Asia asked in genuine horror. I've only met a couple of them, but they've all been completely wrapped up in either anger, hatred, or pure arrogance. They just want to lash out at anything that's different or they can blame for their problems. They don't care about anything else. Issei answered with a frown. They're also hypocrites. They use magic in a war to exterminate all magic. Talk about contradictory, huh? Why yes, that doesn't make sense. The girl nodded. What can we do? We have to leave this place. That might be tough, Issei admitted. I've only had access to my magic for a short while, so I only have a few spells available, depending on who they send in. So here they are. Following the accompanying gesture from him, Asia blinked as she spotted 5 men walking towards them. They were dressed in what she could see were military uniforms, although they were very generic, with no country flags or regimental flashes anywhere on their person. The only sign of allegiance on them was a single symbol over their hearts, a flame symbol of some sort. The helmets worn by the men were also very different from what she had seen on the few soldiers she'd ever met in her life, seemingly more high-tech than anything else. Surprisingly, they only seemed to be armed with pistols, all of which were holstered at the moment. Boy, piss off, the lead man called. He was a rough-looking man with a nose that had been broken several times and a diagonal scar across his lip. We only want the girl. Leave now and you can escape without a beating. Yeah, how about no? Issei discreetly interposed himself between Asia and the men, readying himself to fight. Like I'm going to let a bunch of suspicious old men in cosplay take a girl away to do who knows what to her. Suspicious, old, cosplay? 3 of them reacted in a consternation and fury at Issei's words, but they quietened down at a quelling gesture from the apparent leader, who glared at Issei. Damn brat, we gave you a chance to get lost, now you're gonna get the shit kicked out of you. Ryuji, Tensei, go. Two of them, two of the ones who Issei had managed to insult, moved towards the boy, cracking their knuckles threateningly. Issei-san. Asia whimpered. Leave it to me, Asia, Issei said confidently, before charging at the two men, taking them off guard. Who would expect a boy to attack a pair of fully grown men? Why, you little. The one called Ryuji growled and lashed out with a straight punch that should have rung Issei's bell. Except the brown-haired boy dodged to the right and delivered a solid punch to the soldier's solar plexus, driving the breath from the soldier's lungs and making him stagger back and fall to his knees, desperately trying to regain his breath. So you're stronger than you look, huh? Tensei sneered. I'm a black belt in karate. You really think that you can beat me without the element of surprise, brat? ... Did you attend some kind of school for henchmen? Cause that's the only way I can think of that you learned to talk like a brainless goon. Issei asked frankly. A vein beat a tempo on the man's temple before he shouted and leapt forward to try and deliver a backhand strike. Issei ducked underneath it and smashed a very solid punch between his opponent's legs, letting out a sound like a mouse had just been trod upon. Tensei collapsed to the ground, his hands cradling his family jewels, and he resisted the urge to cry. Every other male present automatically crossed their legs in an instinctive reflex to protect their manhood. You don't fight fair, do you, kid? The leader asked casually after taking a moment to survey his two, temporarily out of commission, men. Against purifiers. After a former member of you lot tried to kill me and my parents in a fit of pique because he got kicked out of your organization. Hell no, Issei bit out, glaring back at him. Oh, so you're the kid who that weak louse Yoshimura Ryotaro almost knifed. The man nodded in recognition. Yeah, I can see you'd not have a good view of us because of that. Let me guess, you know about the name because he ranted about us. Pretty much, Issei confirmed warily, eyeing the man carefully. Looks like you've been training yourself to fight in case someone goes after you again. Sensible, but pointless against us, the man said, drawing out a length of steel from his belt and then snapping it out into full extension, revealing it to be a collapsible baton. For the purity of our species and souls. For the purity of our species and souls. The other two echoed. As if it were a vocal command, their helmets clicked and faceplates slid into place on each of them. A burning flame emblem appeared on the faceplate, which was otherwise blank, and the three soldiers started to advance on Issei as well. Asia watched in horror as her friend put up a valiant fight. But under the attentions of three soldiers, he was beaten unconscious, although not without getting his licks in firsts. One soldier's faceplate was cracked from when he had taken a hit from one of his compatriots when Issei dodged a strike, while another was muttering uncomfortably from when Issei had dislocated his arm. Only the leader was spared, and even he was breathing hard. Little shit. One of the formerly incapacitated men spat. He made to kick at the boy, but the leader punched him in the face. Why? Leader, why? Because he did what he thought was right, you cretin. We can respect that much, at least. The leader growled. Our objective was the holder of Twilight Healing and now we have her. Tensei, Ryuji, you're leading the way back. Ayanokoji, Higashi, take custody of the freak. Issei-san. Asia whimpered worriedly as she was roughly grabbed. Worried about your boyfriend. The leader sneered. He's just knocked out. He'll wake up a bit sore in an hour or so. You should be more worried about what's going to happen to you. With Issei, it took all of Issei's control, not to mention every level of his composure skill, to not leap up and start slicing and dicing the purifiers where they stood. Fun fact, having to act like an ordinary high school student every day did wonders for leveling composure. He'd noticed that some people were following him and Asia on their little knot date, and had taken steps in case something like this happened. He'd slipped off to the toilet while in the fast food place and sneakily used the gamer's store to buy the necklace that Asia wore now, and keyed it to him. While she wore it, he could track her location on his Dungeon Finder app. While cutting down the idiots had initially occurred to him when they showed up, he decided to track them to their lair and bust Asia out as he trashed the place. Emotionally, the plan left a bad taste in his mouth, but it was the best plan to excise the purifiers from Kyo Town once and for all. He'd dozed it to Asia once he'd rescued her, a useful fact that he'd just found out. Even with his eyes closed, he could still see the floating notes above people's heads. Kasuga Hayakairo LV-20, Purifier Flame Fire Team Leader. Ayanokoji Heideki LV-18, Purifier Flame. Higashi Hiroyuki LV-18, Purifier Flame. Ishida Tensei LV-17, Purifier Flame. Tatsunoko Ryuji LV-17, Purifier Flame. Letting himself get beaten up was a pain, but thanks to his lesser resilience perk, which he still had because he kept getting hit by monsters in the dungeon, he had basically taken no damage from it, and, thanks to his lesser HP regeneration skill, All of the damage he hadn't ignored was now healed. Now all he had to do was wait for the idiots to leave and disarm this stupid dimensional field thing, and he could get to tracking them down. The proper name for the field they'd set up was a dimensional arena, and he had no clue as to how they'd gotten their hands on it. From what he'd gathered from his research via the gamer's gear, magic to do with time, space, and gravity was rare and hard to come by, and even harder to learn and use. The Devils used Dimensional Battlefield in their raiding games, but most other supernatural factions only had a handful of users who could use that kind of magic with any degree of skill. As for items that could use it, there were only a handful outside of sacred gears. This field had been generated by using a disposable item, which was ludicrous. Just about the only thing Issei could think of that could make something like that was the gamer's gear, and he certainly hadn't used the store to buy these things. That left one rather uncomfortable conclusion for him to make. The Tartarus gamer's gear holder was selling things from their gamer's store to the Purifiers. Whether or not they were a member of the Purifiers or not was unknown, but it was the only explanation that made sense to Issei with the limited information he had. Dimensional Arena has been taken down. Opening his eyes, Issei dismissed the thoughts he had been considering for the moment. He had a damsel in distress to rescue. Leaving the park at a run, the gamer ducked into an alley and changed into his battle rattle, including a new cloak, the chameleon cloak that he hurriedly bought. It basically let him blend into his surroundings almost perfectly, but was useless against all magical detection methods, which was why he hadn't bought it before now. Suitably dressed for the occasion, Issei checked the locator to see that Asia was still moving, so he'd have to start playing catch-up. Activating basic magic body enhancement in haste, he then used Power Leap repeatedly to climb to the rooftops before setting out in the direction that Asia was headed. She must be in a van or something, the Seirking thought as he leapfrogged from rooftop to rooftop. Gun control in Japan's crazy strict, so they'd have had to have set up that dimensional arena ahead of time and then waited in their van for us to trip the trap before entering into the arena directly. Sneaky bastards. For acceptable deductive and logical reasoning, you gain +1 wise. Issei swore that he would power strike whatever being infested his gaming gear if it was his last act on Earth. Whatever vehicle was carrying Asia was making stops and starts inconsistent with the locations of traffic lights and the flow of traffic. From what Issei could discern, it looked as if they were doing some sort of scheduled meetups with other people for some reason. A horrible thought occurred to him. What if Asia wasn't the only person captured by these lunatics? What if there were more of them? It hadn't occurred to him that they might try a massive grab operation, even as late in the day as it was. He'd have to think about how to deal with that situation if it came up. Finally, he spotted his quarry. It was a large van, blue in color, rusty here and there, but otherwise unobtrusive and completely ignorable thanks to the sticker on the side that proclaimed it to belong to a company that performed sewage system repairs. Pure Drains. Seriously, they weren't even trying to be subtle with that name. Following them was easy, but with a cloak that made him all but invisible, that was to be expected. Plus, it looked as if the Purifiers were finished with their little starts and stops and were in the process of heading back to their base, so they were being pretty sloppy in regards to keeping an eye out for anything or anyone following them. On the bright side, this whole day was doing wonders for his skills. His hand-to-hand combat mastery skill had gone up by 3 levels to level 4 from fighting the morons. Plus his basic magic body enhancement and power leap skills were also leveling pretty well, with both almost at level 3. Every cloud has a silver lining, after all. Come on, where are you going? Issei muttered impatiently as the van just seemed to drive around aimlessly for about 15 minutes. Hurry it up already. He'd taken the liberty of turning his phone off, just in case his mother or father decided to call him at an inopportune moment. He'd seen enough films and played enough games to know that he wanted no part of that particular trope. He couldn't risk a full-on charge into the facility once the idiots in the van stopped playing around as if they were on a fetch quest in Grand Theft Auto. For all he knew, they had some sort of self-destruct system like the Project Rat King site had possessed. Or worse, they could use Asia as a hostage or even kill her if they thought they were losing. No, stealth would be the name of the game once he got inside ... at least until he got Asia and any others out. After another 5 minutes of the van playing around, it finally headed towards the northern outer edge of Kyoto Town, where there were factories, warehouses, and other industrial-type buildings. At the very outermost edge of the town was a single-walled factory compound, complete with the same Pure Drains symbol that was on the van. Having spotted that ahead of time, Issei made sure to get ahead of the van and leap over the wall before clambering up the drain pipe on the side of the building to a ledge before watching his quarry enter the compound and drive up to the loading dock and then watch the driver get out and throw the rear doors open, revealing 5 people, most of whom Issei knew. Blinking in shock, Issei spotted not only Asia among the captured people, but Murayama and Kades, as well as a third-year girl called Abe Kiyom and his perverted female classmate Kuryueka. The last was a guy who looked green from the travel, with sienna-colored hair and pretty casual clothes. He looked as if he had just been snatched off the street, much like the others. Great, now I have to save 5 more people, plus however many other people are held captive in here. The boy grumbled. Just wonderful. 04. His curse came as a quest screen appeared in front of him. Quest alert. A dragon gamer to save the damsels. Asia Argento, Kuryueka, Abe Kiyom, Murayama Keiko, Kades Ryako and an unknown boy have been kidnapped by the Purifiers and taken to their last base in the Kyo town area for an unknown purpose. But as it is the Purifiers, it cannot be with their best interests in mind. Rescue all whom you can, and put the facility to the sword so that the Purifiers lose their last foothold in Kyo town. Quest Objective 1, Rescue Asia Argento. Quest Objective 2, Rescue Murayama Keiko, Kades Ryako, Kuryueka, Abe Kion and the Unknown Boy. Quest Objective 3, Destroy the last redoubt of the Pure Dungeon. Warning, there are 3 hidden objectives on this quest. Search everywhere and act cautiously to discover them all. Quest Reward 1, 10,000 yen Improved Reputation with Asia Argento. Quest Reward 2, Improved Reputation with Murayama Keiko, Kades Ryako, Kuryueka, Abe Kion and X1 Rare Skill Book. Quest Reward 3, At War Status with Purifiers, 50,000 yen X3 Random Pieces of Rare Equipment. Mystery Prize. This quest is mandatory and has been auto-accepted. Let's face it, you wouldn't have said no anyway. Smug, snarky bastard, Issei muttered. Dismissing the window with a sharp gesture, he looked around for a way into the building. He was doubtful that he could pull a Bruce Willis from the first Die Hard film and crawl through the air ducts, and entering through the doors at the front or back was out of the question. That left windows, and fortunately, there were several windows on the ledge he stood on. Most were closed, but thankfully, a few people were sloppy enough to leave some open. A few even had the security latches unhooked. From stories his father had told him about office workers, Issei guessed that these windows were the result of some people having a quiet smoke without their supervisors noticing. Typical people who use cancer sticks. Issei had no desire to befoul his body with them, no way. As he reached for the window, yet another screen popped up in front of him. Warning, you are about to enter the enemy fortress/dungeon last redoubt of the Pure LV-20. Unlike conventional dungeons, this one is fully under the control of your enemies and has active and passive systems designed to track mundane camouflage methods. Do you wish to continue? Y. M. Issei quickly equipped the Cloak of Shadows and hit Y before sinking into the shadows and speeding into the building, looking for the security room. There had to be one, a place where the Flints watched over a bunch of security screens and sipped coffee while scientists did who knows what to innocent people elsewhere. Enough. Focus yourself. Issei jarred himself back into focus. He had to cut off their eyes and ears in the building first, then he could track down any self-destruct systems that the place had and disable them. Then he would track down Asia and the others, and so help him if a single strand of hair on Asia's head was hurt. Gamer's mind activated. Phew, that was such a useful trick. Being able to merge with the shadows was by far the coolest part of this cloak's abilities. He was so glad that he'd chosen it when he'd driven off Deathmaster Snitch. It was making getting around the facility a breeze, speeding right past guards, under doors as if they weren't there, and hello there, looks as if he'd just found his first target. The security room was actually pretty damn big, with an entire wall of screens being watched ... or not as the case may be ... by a single guard ... who was currently snoring like a chainsaw. Very loudly, with his feet up on the desk. Okay, maybe this wasn't going to be nearly as much of an uphill slog as he'd imagined. Just to be safe, Issei checked around the area for any hidden booby traps or hidden guards that he couldn't see. He found none, but he did find a key to the base's self-destruct sequence, along with a simple instruction pamphlet on how the system worked, in a small room that had its way barred by infrared lasers. Not much of a barrier to him. In under the sensors, grab the items, into the inventory, back into shadows and back into the main security room. There hadn't even been a weight or pressure-sensitive plate to sound an alarm if the key was taken. A part of Issei, the part that was fond of puzzle games, was somewhat offended by the Purifier's lackadaisical security measures, while the majority of him was glad for it. No need to make his job any harder than it already was. Knocking out the guard wasn't hard, nor was hiding him in the nearby storage closet after binding him up nice and tight with a rope binding prison. He'd purchased a large amount of rope from the store after he'd first gotten it for just such an occasion. Figuring out how to disable the security systems was a tougher one, but buying a spell scroll that rendered all electrical appliances inert within a certain area was easy enough, as was deactivating most of the sensors and alarms, swiftly followed by wrecking the controls so they couldn't be reactivated later. Taking a look at the pamphlet, it turned out that, while there were 3 keys for the facility's self-destruct system, only 2 were actually necessary to initialize it. The day's security officer had access to 1. The chief scientist had 1 and the facility head had 1. There were 2 initialization devices in the facility head's office and in the chief scientist's office. All it took was a moment to insert the keys, turn them in unison, and 10 minutes later, the facility would implode. The facility head was the obvious target here. Isolated in his office, Issei could simply deal with him and take his key before going to the chief scientist's office and wrecking the console for the self-destruct there, just in case there was something sneaky there that could bypass the need for keys and trip the self-destruct instantly. Locking the security room door from the inside and piling several filing cabinets against it just in case, Issei was about to head out when a ding sounded and a window popped up in front of him. Congratulations, you have discovered the hidden quest objective, blind, deaf and dumb. Reward deferred until quest completion. Was that really necessary? Issei muttered with a shake of his head as he dismissed the notification. Then he entered his shadow state, slipped under the door and sped along the corridors looking for the facility head's office. He really hoped it wasn't like the one at the Project Rat Poison site. He'd have no chance of ambushing the occupant if everyone and their grandmother could look in through the windows. You heard. There's been 5 more test subjects brought in, a voice said from an open door nearby, making Issei pause and slip into the room to lurk in the shadows to listen in. Well, we are out of the ones that were shipped in from outside of the QO area. Another man grunted. That daft quack Tenkyujo goes through them like a fat kid through a bowl of peanuts. And having that nutcase woman Raka here ain't doing anyone a favor either. Yeah, but orders from command were to not touch the local filth without orders. The first man protested. We've got a large number of supernats in the city, you know. Akiba couldn't stop Tenkyujo on his lonesome. What makes you think he stand a chance with that Nia woman here too? The second man scoffed. Besides, we've been put into the cold. Command's ready to wash their hands of us, so Akiba's authority here is basically nil right now, I suppose. The first man nodded. When's Tenkyujo gonna start on the specimens? Has he already started? Nah, he's a sadistic bastard. He'll let them stew in the cells for the night before even talking at them. The second man replied. By the time he actually starts experimenting on them, they'll be too scared to do anything but obey. I hear one's a foreigner with a gear, the first man said excitedly. There's also one with a sleeping gear as well. Both are girls. Poor bitches. They'll regret being born by the time he gets through with them. The second man snorted. Tenkyujo hates unscientific nonsense like sacred gears more than any other type of supernatural. Deciding that he'd heard enough for the moment, Issei slipped off and barely restrained his rage at the unfeeling bastards who infested this building. That genocidal bitch Rakania was here as well, which meant that this became all the more complicated. Of particular interest in the little gossip session that he'd just overheard was the relative powerlessness of the facility head. If that was the actual case, there was a good likelihood that he'd had his key removed as well. That's what he'd do in the case of a successful Polite with Menace's takeover bid, anyway. The chances that Rakania had the third key was high. Ah well, he'd been meaning to do something about her anyway, so it was very nice of her to place herself in his crosshairs so politely. Oh, and there she was right now, walking down the corridor next to someone. How convenient. Rakania LV-19, Deputy Head Scientist of Project Damocles. Tenkyujo Arima LV-20, Head Scientist of Project Damocles. So she'd leveled up twice since he'd last seen her. That was quick. Turning his attention to Tenkyujo, Issei recoiled slightly. Freakily, the guy looked a bit like an older version of Kiba Yudo, albeit with long black hair and a couple of scars across his face. He also had brown eyes and led of a sort of aura that made Issei feel uneasy about being near him. Kyukuku ... With these new test subjects, I can finally figure out how to extract a sacred gear without relying on such ridiculous things as magic or supernatural powers. The man crowed. I think that blonde girl first ... She has the only awakened sacred gear. I'll use the one in the glasses next. Sounds like a plan. Nia replied, her face sly and seductive. How does dinner in my quarters sound tonight, Arima? Very pleasant, my dear. The head scientist smirked back. Very pleasant indeed. Okay, those two gave Issei the shivers. Evidently they were an item. Although whether Nia had seduced him to avoid punishment after fleeing Project Rat Poison, or if they were a long-standing couple he didn't know. They were both insane bigots, so they were welcome to one another so far as he was concerned. Speeding along past them, leaping from shadow to shadow, Issei investigated everywhere he could get into, which was most of the building above ground. There was a basement, which was likely where Asia and the others were being held. Where on earth was the project head's office? After 10 more minutes of frantic searching and finding only useless stuff to do with the cover business of pure drains, the Secretary was forced to conclude that the office was likely in the lower levels, so that's where he had to go. Finding the elevators was easy. They were hidden under the main stairway, and people used them all the time, to the point that tracks were left in the floor tiles. Why they even bothered hiding the doors was beyond him, but they likely explained it away as a refurbishment issue or something. Zipping through the doors and down the elevator shaft, Issei kept an eye out for any cracks of light that would indicate doors. It wasn't a very big elevator shaft, maybe as tall as a 2-story house, if that, and there was only a single exit at the very bottom. Exiting there, Issei had to quickly move to the ceiling, as the corridors were barren of any clutter or equipment like the above-ground building was, plus the decor was the same eye-watering shade of white as the Project Rat Poison base had been. Reduced to skipping between the lights, Issei made it to a large room that, thankfully, had a lot of stuff casting shadows for him to hide in. The stuff in question were a bunch of cork boards that had what looked like the scribblings of a madman, combined with pictures of people in various stages of being dismembered. Some of them looking as if they had still been alive and conscious as it was being done. Manfully restraining the urge to throw up, Issei started to grimly search the underground floor for his quarry. The person in charge of this charnel pit was in for a reckoning. After a few minutes, Issei finally found his target, locked in a positively palatial office and sipping a thumb of whiskey. He was a fat, balding man dressed in an ill-fitting silk suit, with a weak chin and watery gray eyes. All in all, he practically screamed bureaucratic weenie from every pore of his body, which explained his title. Akiba Hirohito LV-25. Puppet Facility Head of Project Damocles. So he had either been reduced to a puppet by Tenkyujo after being put into the cold by Purifier command, or he had been a figurehead from the get-go. While amusing, it didn't change the fact that Issei had some questions, and Akiba was going to answer them. Stupid bastards. Why me? Why am I lumped with this shitty position? The man whinged to himself as he nursed his drink. What did I ever do to deserve this kind of treatment? Appearing out of the shadows at his side, Issei drew his blood metal gladius and placed the edge at the man's neck, making him freeze. Akiba's eyes bulged out of their sockets as they took Issei's armored form in. Akiba Hirohito, your angel of death had come for you, Issei intoned, the flat, monotone of his disguised voice making the pronouncement all the more intimidating, judging by the cold sweat that the man was now dripping in as his foot started to reach out to press a button under his desk. Do not bother trying to press that button that would sound an alarm. I have rendered this room quite isolated to the outside. WH, who are you? WH, what do you want? The man gibbered in fear, his foot retreating. I am going to ask questions. You are going to answer them. The gamer stated softly. If an answer is unsatisfactory, I will make you wish you had never been born. Then I will ask again. You don't want to know what will happen if I dislike your answer a second time. I clear. Why yes, Akiba burbled fearfully. Good. Now then, Issei said with satisfaction at his successful intimidation. Start talking. I want to know everything about this facility and its secrets. With a whimper, Akiba started to talk. Chapter 16, The Great Escape and Mecha Battle. Akiba Hirohito's office. Issei finished tying up the fat idiot who had, for all intents and purposes, been turned into a figurehead by his own subordinates. The gamer had also stuffed a wad of cloth into his mouth to stop the man from trying to call for help while he was distracted. Granted, that wasn't likely to work either way since, according to the floor plans he'd gotten from the security office, this particular office had been soundproofed. Apparently, there were a few such rooms designated in every Purifier base for when secure information needed to be discussed. Still, better safe than sorry. That, and Akiba's yelling, shouting, and whimpering had gotten really old, really quickly. With the enemy secure for now, Issei decided to let the man stew for a few minutes while he ransacked his office. He quickly stripped it of everything even slightly expensive, looking to sell off later as he went over everything he'd learned from the blubbering coward behind him. First, the spineless worm had indeed still kept possession of the key that the facility head was supposed to have, which Issei had already relieved him of. Second, the man had been little more than a bureaucratic puppet since day one. The sadistic fuck known as Tenkyujo Arima had pretty much usurped control of the facility from day one, ruthlessly ensuring that the Akiba had known that his purpose was to act a glorified paper pusher, and rubber stamp for any projects Arima requested or greenlit. Needless to say, Akiba bore a considerable grudge against the younger, more handsome man, and he happily vented his spleen about the man toward Issei in a rant that sounded a lot like what Motohama and Matsuda could produce whenever they complained about Kiba-Yudo. Third, Project Damocles was apparently Tenkyujo's baby and his magnum opus, a supposed means of detecting, nullifying, and destroying any sacred gear within a set area. Apparently, the man who could pass as Kiba-Yudo's long-lost evil big brother despised magic in all its forms and had a special hard-on against sacred gears. So far, they only had marginal success on the first part, minimal success on the second, and no progress on the third. Issei honestly doubted they'd have any chance without using one of said hated devices. Fourth, the prison where Asia and the others were being held was on the level directly beneath this one. Unfortunately, it was also crawling with at least a dozen guards at any given time. Apparently, they believed that 3 high school girls, a nun and a boy, were that dangerous simply because they had a bit of supernatural power. Idiots. Kades and Murayama likely had no clue about their supernatural heritage, and were far more dangerous with Bakken and Shinai than they were with whatever powers that they held within them. Heck, Issei had the bruises that could attest to that fact. HMMM. The bound and gagged man protested as Issei finished throwing the last uselessly gold-plated object into his inventory. "Be silent, or I'll slit your gizzard," Issei threatened darkly, quoting one of his favorite games in order to try to be intimidating. Either it worked, or Akiba was even more of a gutless coward than he thought. Given the muffled whimpering escaping the man's gag, Issei would bet his hentai that it was the latter. Seriously, this was the head of Kyo's Purifier division, PFFT. With the nuisance once more silenced, Issei pondered his next move. His original plan had been to go to the head scientist's office and smash the console that may or may not have a way around the 2 keys to activate base self-destruct system, and that was still a priority. The thing was, the information he'd managed to coerce from the cowardly Akiba had included the fact that a captured dwarf, the one who had forged the rapscallion wave blade that was still Issei's favorite sword and the dagger of the Draugr, was also being kept in this building. Or rather, his body was kept here. He had been tortured to death by that madman Tenkyujo over a month ago. So far as Issei could understand it, the head scientist had been driven into a frenzy at the unscientific metallurgic sense that the dwarf had exhibited and had proceeded to vivisect the poor being alive, and without anesthetic in an attempt to find some logical source for it. Issei was no psychologist, but it was becoming painfully obvious that Tenkyujo was some kind of sociopath, psychopath, nutbar. And magic and sacred gears were apparently the triggers that drove him into a frenzy. No way in hell was he letting that bastard within 100 feet of Asia as long as he drew breath. Back to the matter at hand. Once the nutbar had finished desecrating it, the poor dwarf's body had been stored in its forge room where he'd been forced to craft numerous pieces of equipment for the purifiers and ratmen. If nothing else, Issei was of the opinion that the dead deserved to be put to rest in peace, so he was going to at least reclaim the dwarf's remains and get them out of here and either lay them to rest elsewhere, or turn it over to the devils to pass on to his kin. He was also going to filch all of the blacksmithing equipment and any remaining magical goodies still stored in the forge while he was at it. No point letting it all go to waste, right? Noticing that Akiba was trying to inch his bound feet towards the alarm again, Issei sighed in annoyance. Reaching out, he grabbed the fat fool, dragged him around his desk, away from the button, and swiftly bound him to the wall through a combination of throwing knives and rope binding prison, leaving him looking like an Iraq had just wrapped him up for a snack. "That makes twice you've crossed me, Purifier," Issei informed the man icily. "There shall not be a third. After all, even the Buddha gets angry if you strike him 3 times. Ignoring the man who had just pissed himself in fear. Again, Issei moved to the desk and started to ransack it. One of the things that he found was a gold-plated Desert Eagle, of all things. Quite why the man liked gold so much was beyond Issei, but he was reasonably certain that this gun was more useful as a paperweight than as an actual weapon. Other findings in the desk included 1,000,000 yen in unmarked bills, a set of car keys, and a dusty, and likely completely unused, all areas access card key for this facility. Everything was quickly and happily swept into his inventory. "Thank you for your generous donation to the Purifier Beatdown Fund, Akiba," Issei snickered to himself. After he finished his looting, Issei began to seal the already locked room shut as best he could, moving the desk and anything remotely heavy-looking which amounted to a couple of now empty bookcases and an end table in front of the door. As he finished, another pop-up appeared. Congratulations! You have discovered the hidden quest objective, fortifying inside a fortress. Reward deferred until quest completion. This again. Issei scowled. Seriously, can't it wait until after the quest's complete to tell me these things, especially if I don't get anything out of it? With those muttered words, Issei reactivated the Cloak of Shadows once again and sped out underneath the door, leaving the terrified Akiba Hirohito to squirm uselessly in his bindings. Moving via the shadows on the lights, Issei took care to remain still if someone came down the corridor. While most people would probably dismiss the possibility of seeing a shadow moving, these people were aware of the supernatural world and so might be paranoid enough to suspect that a moving shadow was something more than a trick of the eye or flickering lights. Fortunately, the Purifier personnel seemed to be busy and fell for the universal weakness of all humans. They rarely ever considered looking up when they knew there was no threat in the area. Heck, even when there was a threat, humans rarely looked higher than their own eye level. This worked to Issei's advantage as he flitted across the ceiling. It took him a while, but he finally found the room where the dwarven blacksmith had been imprisoned and his corpse thrown into. It was a large door, looking more like something that belonged on a vault. Thankfully, while extremely thick and secure, it was not air-sealed, meaning Issei could slip in simply enough. Beyond the door, the room was completely pitch black, the cracks too thin to let light slip in besides a slight gleam from the gap between the door and its frame, leaving Issei completely blind as he emerged from the shadows. Fireball. He incanted quickly, raising a single hand. The ball of flames appeared, floating above the palm of his hand, and he quickly fought down on the instinctive urge to send the fireball flying at something and simply focused on keeping it stationary as it floated above his hand. It wobbled a bit, but mostly stayed put. Then a set of windows started popping up in front of his nose. Congratulations! As a result of a specific action, the skill Spell Manipulation has been created. Spell Manipulation active LV1, 0%. It is not often that a mage who is not at least a journeyman attempts the act of spell control, let alone succeeding. Congratulations for having heaven-defying luck. The ability to manipulate spells that have already been cast is a very useful tool, and is a key component in creating new spells, or even just discovering ones that already exist in the system. There is still a chance that the resulting spell will blow up in your face, but what is life without a bit of risk? Allows you to control the shape, speed, direction, and other properties of a spell. Grants access to the spell creation system when this skill reaches LV20. Reduces the chance for manipulation failure by 5% per level. Current reduction, 5%. Uses 30 MP minute to use. As a result of your use of spell manipulation, the Tier 1 Fire spell Fire Lantern has been discovered and added to your spellbook. Fire Lantern active LV1, 0%. An extremely useful spell for adventurers and explorers, Fire Lantern acts exactly as the name suggests, forming a fireball and letting it float in the air above, illuminating the area in a certain radius around the caster. The only reasons it is a Tier 1 spell is due to the strain of continuously keeping it active, as well as its secondary effect. You can instantly use it as a base to cast the fireball spell while reducing the cost of the spell by 90%, at the cost of consuming the Fire Lantern. As one grows in skill with this spell, the number of Fire Lanterns that can be created and sustained at once shall grow. Number able to be created, 1. Costs 10 MP minute to maintain. Costs 20 MP to initially activate. Staring blankly at the window for a moment, the gamer then waved it away with a sigh. As interesting as that was, he needed to stay focused on completing his current quest. He could geek out about his new skills later when he was safely back in his base. Lowering his hand and leaving the Fire Lantern floating over his shoulder, the Red Dragon gamer began to look around the room. The place looked like someone had taken a medieval blacksmith shop and placed it in a science lab. The smooth linoleum and metal tables scattered across the room sharply contrasted the array of metalsmithing tools lying around. A forge, an anvil, a grindstone, several metal racks, and a literal mountain of coal, not to mention several heaps of iron and dozens of other metals all stacked against one wall. But what really caught Issei's attention was the very impressive-looking blacksmith's hammer resting on top of the anvil. It was completely covered in what Issei guessed were runes, each glowing a soft blue light in the near darkness. Oh, and there was a shambling zombie thing that was slowly making its way towards him with shambling gait of a stereotypical undead. Wait, what? Dwarven Revenant LV25. Animated course, collection of hatred and resentment. The approaching figure, when it finally shambled into the full light of his spell, definitely had the stereotypical look of a dwarf, short, stocky, and heavily muscled. It lacked a beard, however, and half of its skin was a very unhealthy shade of blue, for whatever reason, while the other half seemed to have started rotting away and was only barely being held together by whatever unseen force was animating the rest of the corpse. The stench emanating from the thing was enough to make Issei choke and his eyes water even from a distance. Oh, observe. Issei managed to cough out through his bile, not letting his watery eyes leave rotten corpse. Name, Dwarven Revenant. Level, 25. Titles, Animated Corpse, Collection of Hatred and Resentment. Race, Possessed Draugr Land. Interference from a 7th tier curse blocks the viewing of all stats, perks, and flaws. Description: the corpse of a dwarf, tortured to death by a cruel and insane human scientist. Such was the dwarf's resentment and anger over his fate that, as he expired, his mortal vessel was cursed by his spirit to never reveal its secrets to his killer. Drawn by the negative power of the curse, the negative emotions left by the spirits of others who died at the hands of the same man began to gather within the corpse and amplify the power of the original curse, eventually using the remaining magic to reanimate the body as a revenant, a curse on the living and nigh unstoppable to those without the knowledge on how to slay one. "Fuck me running," was all Issei could say to that. A Draugr ... He looked into those briefly after running into a particularly evil dagger that shared the same name. They were supposed to be a type of Norse undead, but he couldn't find any real details of them. All he could do was look up the species in the gaming gear and hope it had some info on how to kill the thing. Possessed Draugr Land, a subspecies of the ordinary Draugr Land, which in turn is a subspecies of the revenant undead specific to the Norse pantheon. While regular Draugr are animated by the will of their souls, possessed Draugr have been animated by a collection of souls or fragments thereof. This may or may not include the soul of the original owner of the body. Unlike regular Draugr, possessed Draugr mostly lack the abilities that it possessed in life, but in exchange can possess abilities drawn from the various souls that animate it. A possessed Draugr possesses the standard abilities of a regular Draugr, including the ability to enlarge itself to great sizes and possess superhuman strength. They are immune to all mundane, non-magical weaponry, but possess most of the standard weaknesses of undead. Well, this would be an interesting fight. Interesting in the false, Chinese version of the word, that is. Pulling his blood metal gladius and rapscallion wave blade out of his inventory, the Sekiryude muttered, "Magic weapon reinforcement." As the crimson glow of his magic wrapped around his swords, the Draugr growled, stopping a couple of meters away. Oh wonderful, it was smart enough to sense that Issei now had the ability to hurt it. That was just lovely. Smart monsters were so much harder to kill than dumb ones. Then the damned zombie thing started growing, its entire body swelling up until its head scraped against the ceiling of the room, which was at least 5 meters high. As the undead dwarf loomed over him, Issei had only one thing to say to this situation. Didn't expected to be dwarfed by a dwarf. Apparently the Draugr didn't appreciate his sense of humor. The giant dwarf let out a bellowing roar before rearing back and throwing a punch with an arm that was now the size of a large log. Issei didn't even think about blocking it, no matter what kind of armor he was wearing. Trying to block a punch like that would only end in him taking some serious damage. Instead, he leapt to one side, barely managing to avoid the fist bigger than his head. Said fist smashed into the ground, making a crater in the linoleum and revealing the steel and concrete beneath it. Apparently, this room had been reinforced. Regaining his balance from his wild dodge, Issei pointed his sword at the giant undead. "Burning bomb," he roared out, mentally activating spell manipulation at the same time and jamming a mental slider labeled size of spell effect up as he did so. In response, a sphere the size of a medicine ball appeared at the tip of his blade before swelling to the size of a small car and shooting forwards to explode in the face of the Draugr. Fortunately, Issei had been lucky enough to land near one of the metal lab tables scattered around the room. Acting quickly, he managed to kick the table over and leap behind it just as his firebomb detonated. A wave of flames and heat slammed against the impromptu shield, but Issei was left unharmed. Doubting that a single spell would be enough to take down a behemoth like that, the gamer shot back to his feet as soon as the backlash faded and took aim at the slightly smoldering undead. "Flame spear, fireball," Issei chanted at frantic speed. While he wasn't as far out-leveled as he'd been when he'd been forced to face Armeros the Lesser, the unknown capabilities and close confines he was forced to fight in made this fight feel every bit as dangerous as his confrontation with the two-winged fallen. That being the case, Issei had not intention of holding anything back and was going to do what you should always did when faced with a ravenous member of the undead: kill it with fire. And, considering the Draugr was wailing in agony as the flames of his attack scorched its half-rotten form and reduced chunks of it to blackened char, it was working. Enemy Dwarven Revenant weakness discovered. Slight weakness to fire confirmed. You gain 50 XP. You have inflicted the burning status effect on Dwarven Revenant. Enemy loses a set amount of HP over time until status effect is lost. Well, that was a kick in the balls. A slight weakness. Wasn't that like being just a little bit pregnant? At least the enemy was feeling the burn. Oh, that was a bad pun. Still, the monster at least felt it, so Issei decided to keep up the pace. Flaming spears and fireballs rained upon the Draugr, each causing the corpse to roar or wail in pain. But none managing to land a decisive blow. Roaring in agony, the massive undead managed to finally force itself back into motion, charging toward Issei's makeshift barricade and lashing out with one arm, sending both it and him flying backwards across the lab before he crashed into the floor, rolling until his back smacked into the anvil. You have lost 100 HP. Huh, that wasn't nearly as much as I'd expected. Issei mentally grunted as he forced himself back to his feet, using the anvil as a handhold. As he did so, his hand brushed against the large hammer still resting there. "Hoy, ain't that my sword that you're holdin' there, lad?" A new, gruff voice spoke up in his head. "Eh?" Issei looked at the hammer. "Who the? And the hammer?" "Well, the spirit inside the hammer, but that's just quibbling at the moment." The voice answered back. "We can talk later, for now ye need to kill my old body. Blasted thing's no good to anyone now, and seeing myself shambling around like that is a disgrace. Ye need to stop just throwing fire at it. That won't kill that thing near quick enough. Get in there close and cut it up with an enchanted blade, then ye pour the fire into it. The Draugr's skin is resistant to even fire magic, but its insides still burn like kindlin if ye get some flames to 'em." Issei blinked at the insight, but quickly decided to follow the advice. It wasn't like his plan was making that much progress, and the dwarf hammer probably knew more about a Norse undead than he did. "Good lad. Once you've dealt with that unpleasant business, come back over and pick me up. We need to have words," the spirit said. Nodding, Issei turned his attention back to the still smoldering Draugr, which had used his momentary distraction to snuff out the few flames that had managed to catch on its mangled form. If he was going to do this, then he'd better get the most out of his reinforcement magic while he could. Basic body magic reinforcement. He invoked, making his body glow red slightly. Power leap. Invoking his jumping skill, the gamer launched himself towards the head of the giant undead with both swords drawn back. Just before he swung them, Issei activated a third skill, Power Blow. The glow around his swords intensified several times over as he brought both of them forward to strike at either side of the Draugr's head. When both blows landed, they sliced through the undead's rotten flesh and bone like a hot knife through butter, the magic reinforcing his swords, negating the undead's usual immunity to conventional weaponry, and leaving a pair of gaping wounds on the monster's neck and shoulders. Even as his body began to fall back towards the floor, Issei twisted around and began to launch a barrage of fire spells into the new openings. A quick notification that he'd scored a critical hit, and that the burning status effect had been upgraded to internal burning were both good signs. But Issei wasn't about to drop his guard until the undead actually died. He'd learned his lesson when dealing with Armeros the Lesser. Even before his amplification spell, he'd been faster than the Draugr. Now, with his speed enhanced further by his magic, he used every ounce of it to dart around the shambling hulk, stabbing and cutting with his blades before unloading as many fire spells as he could into the new wounds before the undead managed to adjust itself and he was forced to pull back to avoid another attack and then start the process again. This went on for a good 10 minutes, leaving the Draugr smoking as it burned from the inside out and the cuts covering it from head to toe literally glowing from the flames burning within. With a final pained roar, the Draugr began to shrink back down to its normal size, lurching and struggling to move as it did so. A moment later it seemed to combust, the flames within finally eating through its skin and setting the rest of it ablaze as it collapsed forward. A moment later the Draugr was gone, with only a large patch of soot and scorched linoleum showing that it had ever been there. You have successfully defeated Dwarven Revenant. You gain 4000 EXP. As the body is badly burned, inside and out, and you can thus not claim anything from it. You can instead store the entirety of the contents of this room into your inventory except for Spirit Forge Hammer of Eitri Brockason. Do you wish to do so? Why? Smirking, Issei pressed the Y key at once. Who was he to turn down a gift horse? He'd been planning on filching the contents of this room anyway, so why say no to something that sped up the process for him? In a flash, the entirety of the contents of the room, anvil, metals, coal, forge and all, had been sucked into Issei's inventory, leaving only the glowing hammer to thump onto the ground. As a result of your use of spell manipulation, the Tier 2 fire spell Explosive Combustion Sphere has been added to your spellbook. Explosive Combustion Sphere Instant LV1, 0%. Tier 2, an advanced version of the Burning Bomb spell. The Explosive Combustion Sphere greatly expands the fire spell's range and area of effect. While it looks impressive and has a large area of effect, it is actually mostly used as a stepping stone between Burning Bomb and the more powerful Tier 3 spell Combustion Explosion. Costs 70 MP to use. Creates a fiery sphere randomly between 34 inches and 78 inches in diameter. Upon impact with something, the sphere will explode, dealing diameter times user INT plus user Ys and damage across an area equal to double its diameter. Burning Bomb has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Fireball has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Flame Spear has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Basic Body Magic Reinforcement has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Power Leap has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Power Strike has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Lesser HP Regeneration has leveled up. LV6 LV7. As a result of your actions during the mini-boss fight, you earned 3 out of 3 SGP. Not a bad set of upgrades for something that wasn't even a boss battle. Issei mused happily as he deactivated his buffing spell and crushed an MP potion to replenish his dwindling MP reserves. With that done, he went over to the hammer and picked it up. So, you're a sacred gear user then. Suppose that means you're not a member of those Purifier bastards. These fucks hate anything supernatural, their own species included. The dwarven spirit within the hammer said with a gruff snort. And their enemy, I've been running a one-man crusade against them for the past couple of months. Issei answered simply. Earlier they managed to kidnap one of my friends and I tracked them back here. Right now my priorities are to get her and any other innocents they've grabbed out of here and then burn this place to the fucking ground. Hopefully that will finally get the message across that they aren't welcome in my town. BWHHHH. Burn this place to the ground, Issei. Oh, I like your style, lad. The spirit in the hammer laughed for a moment, before growing serious again. And what about the purifiers already here? Especially that Tenkyujo bastard and his little hussy. No need to worry about that. Every person working here knows exactly what their bosses have done and are still willingly supporting them. That makes them no better than monsters in human skin in my book. The Sekiryude stated grimly. I don't intend to allow a single one to flee. As for Tenkyujo and Raka, I could use your hammer to deal the decisive blows on them if you like. It was true. Finding out what had been going on in this base had promoted the purifiers from bad guys who need to be stopped to monsters that need to be removed from the world in Issei's book. Even if some of them had been hurt or had their lives irrevocably damaged by the supernatural like the former head of Project Rat King, Midorikawa Nobayuki, the atrocities that had been freely committed in this building were far beyond Issei's ability to forgive or justify in any form. Every soldier and scientist in the building knew the types of horrors that were going on here and did nothing to stop it, instead trying to justify it as removing a threat to humanity. Issei was going to use the same excuse to remove the threat they represented to him, his home, and his friends. Oh, I like your conviction. The spirit guffawed. The name's Eitri Brockason, proud descendant of the great smith Brocker, one of the dwarves who forged mighty Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Until I was caught and killed by those purifier bastards, I was on a journey of training across the world to perfect my skills as a weaponsmith. Get me revenge upon the poisonous duo of Rakania and Tenkyujo Arima, and I shall aid you in reforging that wave-bladed sword into a truly masterful work as thanks. Quest alert. Dwarven grudge from beyond the grave, Eitri Brockason, or rather his spirit infused into his old forge hammer, has requested that you exact revenge upon the two he holds responsible for his death, Rakania and Tenkyujo Arima. Do so and he shall reward you mightily by upgrading your Rapscallion Wave Blade to a true magical runic blade. Quest Objective 1, Kill Rakania. Quest Objective 2, Kill Tenkyujo Arima. Optional Objective 1, Kill at least one of the targets with Spirit Forge Hammer of Eitri Brockason. Optional Objective 2, Kill both targets with Spirit Forge Hammer of Eitri Brockason. Quest Reward 1, plus 6,000 EXP, 10,000 Yen Fist of the Beast King Skill Book. Quest Reward 2, Quest, A Body for a Blacksmith Unlocked, 6,000 EXP, 10,000 Yen Random Piece of Equipment. Optional Quest 1 Reward, X10 Meteoric Iron Ingots. Optional Quest 2 Reward, X5 Mithril Shards, X1 Orichalcum Dust Pouch. Quest has been auto-accepted, because some people just need to die. Issei couldn't help but laugh a bit. No matter how self-important she tried to act, even his sacred gear agreed that Rakania was simply a secondary concern compared to Tenkyujo. He was willing to bet that such a judgment would drive her insane with fury. Good, those two were already on my shit list anyway, but who am I to turn down such a generous reward? Issei agreed with a grin before he started frowning. Although, what with the racket I just made fighting your old body, I don't doubt that the rest of the base are aware that someone's here. I doubt that. That damned and twisted collection of tortured souls that tried to make off with my corpse went on a rampage at least once a day. Just have a look at the walls, Eitri replied. Looking around, Issei's sweat dropped as he saw massive fist imprints in the concrete walls. Evidently, the Draugr hadn't held back in its wrath as it tried to escape from the room it was imprisoned in. Why didn't it go for the door? He wondered. Draugr may not be totally mindless, but they're still as dumb as a sack of rocks. Eitri scoffed. When it comes to tormenting the living or protecting their treasures, they've got more than a bit of animal cunning. But otherwise they're only a slight step up from your average walking corpse. I'm just glad that there was enough of my soul left in that thing to keep it from damaging the forge. Now that would have been disgraceful. Can I ask why your spirit's inside a hammer instead of wherever dwarves go after death? The gamer asked carefully. I was tortured to death. If I just let go, my soul would be bound straight for Niflheim. The dwarf said, the hammer actually shuddering in disgust. Like I'd sit back and let that happen. It didn't take me long to figure out that the bastards who captured me weren't the type to let me have an honorable death on the battlefield. While they forced me to labor for them, I managed to secretly carve runes onto my hammer so that it would draw in and hold my spirit instead of going to Niflheim if I died outside of combat. And they all said learning runes like that was a waste of 20 years. I see. Well, if you don't mind me using you to hit things, I'll gladly take you along with me. Issei said. Will there be any issues in putting your hammer in an extra-dimensional pocket? It'll be bloody dark, lad. The dwarven spirit retorted. Look, among all of that stuff you just took, there should be a belt. Put that on and then put my hammer in the holster. It'll keep me out of the dark and empty and I'll be able to lend you some advice if we run into anything else in this badam place. That sounded like a fair idea to Issei. A quick look through his inventory revealed the item in question. Dwarven Journeyman's Forge Belt. Accessory. A belt worn by those walking the path of blacksmithing among the Norse dwarves. It is passed down from father to son. As a result of the runes woven into it to protect it from the dangers of the forge, wearing it increases the wearer's resistance against fire by 30% and against molten metal by 20%. It also raises the wearer's blacksmithing level by +1. This essentially gives someone without the blacksmithing skill it for free. Should they level the skill up, they get to keep the skill even if the belt is removed. It was a basic and serviceable belt, with a loop on it clearly designed to have a hammer thrust into it. Issei carefully threaded the handle through the loop and then tied a strap over the head of the hammer to secure it and make sure it didn't go flying out if he made some kind of sudden large movement. Okay then, let's get going. Issei muttered before dropping into shadow and speeding out of the room, pausing as he heard a couple of people chatting outside of the room. Gone on another rampage. That's what, the third time today. I think so, at least it calmed down quickly this time. Last time, it was bashing into the walls for over an hour. Why'd Tenkyujo even let that thing be created? I thought he hated all that magic mumbo-jumbo. I think he wanted to see if it could be tamed. Once Project Rat King inevitably fell through, he wanted a backup plan to present to HQ to stave off their curiosity. And then HQ left us out in the cold. Yup, since then, he's stopped even trying to control it and just ignores the damn thing. He's gotten a lot more twitchy since then too. Then again, so has the damned undead. So we're just supposed to stand out here until we're sure it's stopped. Shouldn't we? I don't know, check inside or something. Fuck no, I like living. We confirmed the door hasn't been breached and waited for the monster to calm down. Now we can leave. I'll put a note in Tenkyujo's tray to let him know about his pet undead throwing another hissy fit. We aren't gonna tell him in person. Again, fuck no. He's banging the bitch Rakania in her room right now. He'll put us on shit detail if we interrupt him in the middle of getting laid. After the two walked away, Issei grimaced. The two just now hadn't even batted an eye at how their boss had brutally murdered someone. These people, congratulations. You have completed the hidden quest due to the dead. Reward deferred until quest completion. Shaking his head, the Sekiryude sped off to find Tenkyujo's office. Now that he'd had it confirmed that the sick bastard was busy screwing his equally sick girlfriend, he could safely start wrecking the man's office and the console inside it without risking getting caught in the act. Finding it wasn't too hard, the room had an obnoxiously ostentatious sign declaring Tenkyujo Arima, Project Damocles head scientist on it. The sign was even plated in gold and had silver inlays. What a waste of money. Seriously, was it a requirement for the big bosses around here to be wasteful in decorating their office doors? The office itself was actually quite Spartan in design. No, more than that, it was practically untouched. There were the bare bones of any office present: desk, chair, computer, etc. But the place looked like it had barely been used, like it was just some prop. Immediately suspicious, Issei looked around warily to try and spot any signs of a trap, but none appeared. Thoroughly unsettled, the boy made his way over to the console that held the self-destruct inputs. Much like the one in Akiba's office, it was a plain white tower unit affixed to the floor opposite the desk, with 2 keyholes, a small screen, and a small keyboard placed at the top. 30 seconds later, Issei's blood metal gladius had reduced the entire tower into a trio of large chunks of broken plastic and sparking circuitry. To use the Western phrase, all the king's horses and all the king's men weren't putting the console back together again. Just to be absolutely certain that it couldn't be miraculously fixed, Issei dumped the scraps into his inventory and used a fire lantern to gently melt the exposed wires on the stump sticking out of the floor. Paranoia suitably satisfied, Issei returned to his shadow state and sped out of the office. There was no point to trying to block the office this time, so he hadn't bothered. Now his priority was finding Asia and the other and getting them all out before he found and smashed the head of the snake and brought this house of horrors tumbling down. The elevator to the second under level wasn't hidden ... but it had armed men guarding it. Not barely armed flints like had been in the Project Rat poison base, but Purifier flames. They kind of looked like the US Marines you had to fight in Half-Life, now that Issei had a closer look at them. Well, minus the fact that they had those high-tech helmets that the 5 flames who had kidnapped Asia had worn. Both were armed with heavy automatic rifles, which made Issei hesitate. He knew his armor was strong, but he wasn't sure how well it'd hold up against that kind firepower, and he wasn't in a rush to test that out when there were other lives at stake. After a moment of silent pondering amidst the shadows, Issei hit on an idea and quickly sped toward the nearest deserted room. Once there, Issei left the shadows, opened up the gamer's store and searched for an item, or rather a set of items, with a particular effect. He'd noticed it while casually skimming through the store and had made a note that it might be useful someday. It just seemed that day had come far sooner than he'd thought it would. He also took the opportunity to sell a lot of the crap he'd requisitioned from Akiba Hirohito's office. Just for the value of the gold, he got a nice chunk of yen. It was probably the most used someone like Akiba had been in his entire life. After purchasing the item he needed, Issei whizzed back to Akiba's office, pausing only briefly to knock out the still-bound waste of space, set it up and turned it on. The device itself looked like nothing more than a giant, futuristic lava lamp, but it was actually a portable wide-area gunpowder neutralization field generator. Every form of gunpowder, from the original black powder used back when firearms were first invented to the chemical concoction used in modern bullets, within a certain radius around the machine were turned into a useless sludge as soon as he'd activated it. It also had the added benefit of neutralizing several forms of explosives that used similar chemicals, ranging from most forms of grenades to even some forms of missiles. Sadly, the only issue was that, despite costing 200,000 yen, the device only came in a single-use variety. "You're quite the big spender, aren't you, lad?" Issei noted cautiously. Weren't dwarves supposed to be a frugal race by nature? So, spending that much so easily was something that might not sit well with one. "When it comes to staying alive, I tend to avoid being stingy," Issei informed his new ally. "Now then, let's get down to rescuing the prisoners." "Prisoners?" the dwarven spirit asked in surprise, which quickly turned to anger. Evidently he had missed Issei's earlier story about prisoners. "You mean that heartless bastard's gotten his rotten mitts on more people to experiment on?" "Unfortunately, yes. 4 teenage girls and 1 boy of an undetermined age." Issei grimaced beneath his menpo. "You can see why I don't want them to stay here any longer than necessary." "Damned right, we'd best get a move on then," Issei agreed grimly. Quickly buying one more thing from the gamer's store, Issei sunk back into the shadows and sped towards the elevator to the second underlevel. The guards looked just as alert as they had before, but unlike before, there was no threat from the automatic weapons each of them cradled in their arms. That being said, causing a ruckus right now probably wasn't the best option. Asia and the others were still being held prisoner, and even without firearms, the guards were likely better armed and more dangerous than the small group of teens. Starting a fight now, even when he could likely plow his way through the guards, would still likely see the Purifiers murdering all of the prisoners out of spite. So rescue first, head bashing later. Decision made. Issei slid across the shadows of the roof and into the elevator shaft before slithering down amidst the darkness. The second underlevel was a lot more secure than the first had been. Pressure-sealed doors and the like separated the entryway from the rest of the floor. Luckily for Issei, there were still ventilation grills dotted here and there close to the ceilings. Apparently, even the Purifiers weren't crazy enough to sacrifice their need for oxygen for the sake of security. After darting around the air vents and peering through the grills for a couple of minutes, Issei had gotten a good idea about the general layout of the prison level. The cells were a barred area that looked out over a fairly large area with several metal tables caked in gore and dried blood. It didn't take a genius to see that it was a pure intimidation tactic on the part of the Purifiers. The prisoners could see into the next room, which practically declared to them, "This is your fate. Cower and whimper in fear. MWA ha 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 ha." Seriously, the evil laugh might sound over the top, but it was just the kind of overdone evil addition that leaving a gore-spattered lab in clear view was broadcasting. That couldn't be sanitary for anyone involved. He could see the 5 prisoners, all of whom looked sick and scared. Asia was praying frantically, while Murayama, Katace, and Kuryu were hugging each other, scared out of their minds. Abe-senpai was comforting the boy despite looking scared herself. Yup, that decided it. These Purifiers were, to quote a Xiangxia novel he'd read once, seeking death recklessly. Making girls cry for real was a death penalty offense. So there's some kind of glass between the bars to prevent any prisoners from escaping. Huh. Issei eyed the little prison carefully. Well then, I think I'd better get the girls and that boy out before I go on a rampage. No sense traumatizing them further. It bemused him slightly as to why the builders of this prison didn't just make the entire thing either a solid wall of transparent glass, or bars that were too close together for someone to squeeze through. But he dismissed the thought. The idiocy of the Purifiers was not his concern. Sliding out of the nearest vent, not even bothering to conceal himself properly anymore, Issei's shadow form darted across the short distance to the large door that separated the cell from the rest of the prison. Torture, research wing, and slipped underneath it. He paused before slipping out of his shadow state, as he knew that given how on edge the girls and one boy were, the likelihood that they'd lash out and attack him were pretty high. Before he emerged, he checked their names and levels out of reflex. Asia Argento LV-19, Excommunicated Holy Maiden. Murayama Keiko LV-16, Kyo Academy Girls Kendo Team Vice Captain. Katace Ryuko LV-16, Kyo Academy Girls Kendo Team Captain. Kuryueka LV-15, Female Perverted Glasses, Erotic Girl. Abe Kiyom LV-23, Abe Family Heiress, Journeyman Beast Tamer. Rudo Nabumasa LV, Innocent Traveling Human. Okay, whoever that boy was, if he was even a boy, he was definitely using some form of advanced disguise magic, skill, or even an enchanted item to hide who he was. A part of Issei wondered exactly who this person was, but the rest of him just hoped that whoever they were, they wouldn't interfere with the rescue. In the next instant, he appeared out of the shadows, startling the 5 prisoners rather badly. "WH, who the hell are you?" Murayama yelled, eyes wide in panic. "Calmly does it, Murayama-san," Issei said placidly before turning to the nun in the room. "Sister Asia Argento." "Why yes," the blonde girl said tremulously. "Hyodo Issei hired me to find and rescue you," he said. "Be at ease, you are safe now." Issei-san. "He's really okay?" Asia asked hopefully. "He regularly receives severe beatings from a bunch of girls wielding shinai empowered with righteous feminine fury. A few whacks from a trio of thugs wielding steel truncheons doesn't quite stack up to that," Issei said dryly. Hyodo, what has he got to do with this?" Eika asked in disbelief. "Issei-san tried to protect me when these awful people kidnapped me," Asia informed them. "He did pretty well, too. He put 2 on the ground initially, and managed to make the other 3 know he'd done his best to hurt them. It was a respectable performance," the Sekiryude added, before shaking his head. "That isn't important right now though. At the moment, they haven't noticed that I'm here for whatever reason. We have to get you 5 out of here." "How? This place is a fortress," Abe-senpai asked tightly. "Magic?" Issei said and pulled the item he'd bought from the gamer's store out of his pocket. It was a transportation magic circle talisman, a one-use only item that let him create a teleportation circle large enough to send up to 10 people up to 20 kilometers from his current location. This is an item that will send you all to a safe location while I ensure that these people regret their actions, not only against you, but against everyone whose blood is on those tables. Why, you plan on killing them, don't you? Asia asked softly. These people have done things that only their gods can judge them for, Sister Argento, Issei stated, deciding to be a bit more formal to hammer home the situation. They were planning on tearing you all to pieces on those tables tomorrow, as they have done to countless innocent people. Their actions must have consequences and blood must be paid in blood. The blonde nun closed her eyes, then nodded slightly. I don't like it ... but I understand. What's all this about magic? Thaddeus asked in confusion. Issei channeled his MP into the talisman and mentally set the exit coordinates as being the core room of his dungeon, as well as the number of people it was to transport to 5, before throwing the talisman onto the floor. Upon striking the concrete, the talisman dissolved and red lines of light shot out from the point it had struck, which formed a magic circle. The pinkette that was cat escaped. All of you, get inside the magic circle, Issei ordered. It'll take you to a safe location. In the meantime, I'll take care of these people. He honestly found it hard to even refer to them as people now. The Purifiers were scum, pure and simple. Even if a small part of him was still feeling queasy about the thought of killing other humans, he was still going to do it. He'd been telling Asia the truth. There had to be consequences for what they'd done, and it was up to him to deliver those consequences. Are you guaranteeing that we'll be safe on the other end of this? Abe-senpai asked guardedly. It will be taking you to my personal safe haven. I can guarantee that the Purifiers have no idea that it even exists, Abe said. Issei replied honestly. However, I will tell you in advance that until I return myself, there will be no way for you all to leave. It's a security measure that I have to ensure that I am perfectly safe while I am there. No one enters or leaves my hideout without my express permission. How's that any different to being trapped here? Murayama demanded, somewhat hysterically. I have no intention, desire or need to cut you open and dissect you while you still live. The gamer replied coolly. I also intend to let you go free once I return. Or would you prefer me to simply take Asia Argento and leave the rest of you here? I am only being paid to retrieve one person, not 5. Of course, he had no intention of leaving them here. If they were going to fall into hysterics, he'd just knock them out and throw them into the magic circle himself. Murayama-san, please be calm, Abe-senpai said sharply as she carefully stood up and led the clearly terrified boy onto the magic circle. A bit longer in confinement where we aren't in mortal danger is much preferable to being left to rot here. You're being rude to this person who is going beyond the scope of his contract when he has no obligation to do so. Gulping at the censure, the dark-haired Kendoka fell silent and meekly followed her senpai onto the magic circle, with Kades following as well. Asia hesitated, looking at Issei. Can I know what your name is? She asked. I am a humble mercenary for hire, nothing more or less, Sister Argento, Issei replied. We can talk more openly once I come to release you all later on today. Please make haste. It's only a matter of time before the Purifiers discover that I am here. Oh, okay. Asia nodded and stepped into the magic circle, the formation glowing more brightly as the activation conditions were fulfilled. In a bright flash of light, the 5 former prisoners vanished from the prison cell as if they were never there to begin with. Issei sighed, slumping slightly in relief. That had been a tiring act to keep up. Hey, where'd that flash come from? It came from the freak's cage. Go and check it out right now. Slipping into shadows, Issei sped up to the ceiling and waited. Sure enough, a few seconds later. Shit, they're gone. The freaks are gone. Impossible, the door is still sealed shut. They've got to be hiding somehow. Get in there and drag them out if you have to. Security, we need all eyes on the containment corridor. After several tense seconds with only the sounds of booted feet stomping around outside his company, the door slammed open, and a couple of men entered the room, looking around frantically. Shit, what the hell? One cursed. There's no sign of them. Both of them are level 14 Purifier flints. Issei thought. Odd, where are the flames? I was expecting them to have more of their elite troops guarding the dangerous prisoners, rather than their foot soldiers. Then again, I suppose it doesn't matter. Emerging from shadow, he fell towards the 2 men, smoothly drawing his swords out of his inventory and drawing them back. The 2 swung around at the sudden appearance of his shadow over them, but didn't even have time to scream as metal met flesh, and their heads went flying accompanied by fountains of blood. After all, they're all dead anyway. The order doesn't matter in the end. You have defeated X2 Purifier flints. You gain 500 EXP. As a result of a specific action, the skill from the shadows I strike has been acquired. From the shadows I strike active LV1 0%. Like a good and proper edgelord, you are at your most dangerous when emerging from the shadows to strike. Whenever you attack from the shadows, your attacks made with bladed weapons have their critical hit chances increased by 20%, raising to 40% when you are specifically targeting limbs or the head. Costs 50 MP to use. Can only be used when attacking from the shadows. Oddly enough, Issei felt absolutely nothing when he struck down his fellow humans. Perhaps it was the gamer's mind flaring up to protect him subtly, or it was simply all the horrors he'd witnessed the Purifiers perform of their own free will without any hesitation. For whatever reason, cutting down these men felt no different than cutting down the monsters in his dungeons. Hell, he'd felt worse after he killed his first ratman. He was done hiding. Asia and the others were safe. That meant it was time to bring justice to the Purifiers for all the innocents they'd slaughtered in their xenophobia and paranoia. And he wasn't going to give them the slightest chance of fighting back. They didn't even deserve that much. Time for some Aints Ulgown style buffing. Issei muttered. Bronze skin, magic weapon reinforcement, force absorption field, basic body magic reinforcement. The glow from his spells activating lit up the cell as he slowly walked toward the exit. He'd spent the better part of a day training with both force absorption field and bronze skin, keeping both active for as long as possible. The results had been even better than he'd hoped, with both now resting at level 9. Which had also eliminated the dexterity penalty from bronze skin. So not only was he now several times more durable than he'd been before, but he as fast and mobile as he could be. Still ... he made a note to set aside some of the rewards for this quest and his looting to buy some more buff-type magics. Any kind of advantage would be good in a pinch, and right now his options were a tad too limited for his tastes. Intruder spotted. Repeat, intruder spotted. We have one unknown in the detention and experimentation block. Location of the 5 captured subjects are unknown. Someone shouted in the distance. All flames immediately capture the intruder at once. Flints, move to guard the elevator to the upper levels. Capture him. Well now, weren't they being a bit arrogant? Someone had managed to get this far into their base without being detected until he killed 2 of their guards in cold blood before brazenly walking out. Did that sound like someone that could be so easily captured? Then again, perhaps finding out exactly how he'd gotten this far might be the reason they were trying to capture him. The sound of stamping feet came from the corridor to his left, drawing Issei from his thoughts as he turned his head and caught sight of several flames charging towards him with assault rifles raised and pointed at him. They were all about level 17-18, with a single level 19. There he is. Aim to immobilize, shoot it in the legs. The level 19 flame ordered. His subordinates quickly stopped, forming a small firing line in front of their leader, took aim, and pulled their triggers in a show of well-practiced coordination. Click, 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 ... only for a truly heart-rending sound to be their only reward. If they weren't utter bastards, Issei might have felt some pity for them there and then. What the fuck? One exclaimed. He swapped out his magazine and tried again, only to hear the same hollow click sounds as he pulled the trigger frantically. Honestly, despite all the dark connotations, the flabbergasted faces spread across the soldiers was kind of funny ... in an oh god you guys are screwed kind of way. Issei couldn't hold in the light chuckles that escaped his lips, and thanks to his voice-obscuring artifact, the laughter came out as a light, monotonous sound. It actually sounded kind of sinister. Did you idiots really think that there wasn't a magical way to counter firearms? Any being with at least some supernatural power and a bit of competence can find a way to counter guns. And unfortunately for you, I happen to have both in spades. Every gun in this entire base is about as effective as a water pistol. Actually, I take that back. At least a water pistol can actually do something other than act as a paperweight. He offered coldly. These bastards had been enjoying tormenting Asia and the other girls. They deserved to taste a bit of their own medicine before the end. Bastard freak, draw bayonets, ordered the level 19 Flint, pulling out the knife-like blade and quickly attaching it to end of his rifle, turning it into makeshift spear. His subordinates quickly copied him, though a couple kept the knife in hand and merely discarded their rifles, wielding them as knives instead. For the purity of our species and souls. For the purity of our species and souls. His subordinates echoed, their faceplates flashing with the flame symbol of the Purifiers before they charged right at him. Not bothering to say anything, Issei brought his swords up and around in a reverse scissor cut, slicing through the barrel and bayonet of the lead Purifier in a single motion, leaving the man with nothing but the rifle's body. A. The man said blankly before Issei stabbed him in the throat. Son of a bitch. Another flame roared, moving around his downed superior in an attempt to stab Issei in the liver. Unfortunately for him, as he tried to stab the bayonet forward, it suddenly slowed down dramatically, stalling his own movements in at the same time. Nice try, but defensive magics beat military hardware. The armored boy informed the man before a backhand swing of one of his blades severed his head at the neck. The remaining purifiers were starting to panic now. This wasn't going as they'd expected. Their ranged weapons had been rendered useless by an unknown magic, and any attempt to terminate the target in CQC was slowed to a snail's pace when it got within a few inches of his body. One of their number had even tried throwing his bayonet from a distance before engaging unarmed. Neither attempt had proven effective, and a single slash had severed the attempter's throat. This wasn't fair. They were supposed to be the strong ones. They were supposed to be stamping out the supernatural scum that infested their world, not being slaughtered by one. Before the remaining purifiers could break or rally, Issei was in amongst them. In short order, all of the flames lay dead on the floor. You have slain Purifier Flame X7. You gain 2450 EXP. Bronze skin has leveled up. LV9 LV10. Bronze skin has reached LVMAX. As a result of maxing out the Tier 0 spell Bronze skin, the Tier 1 spell Iron skin has been added to your spellbook. Please note that this spell is very different from the Angel, Fallen Angel innate racial ability Iron skin. Force absorption field has leveled up. LV9 LV10. Defensive magic has leveled up. LV4 LV5. As a result of reaching LV5 in defensive magic, you are granted a single Tier 1 spell from it. The Tier 1 spell Iron Body has been learned. Basic body magic reinforcement has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Magic weapon reinforcement has leveled up. LV8 LV9. Ambidextrous has leveled up. LV8 LV9. Basic swordsmanship has leveled up. LV9 LV10. Basic swordsmanship has reached LVMAX. As a result, it has upgraded into intermediate swordsmanship. All values remain the same. Level counter has been reset to 1. Iron skin active LV1 0%. Tier 1. An advanced version of the Tier 0 spell Bronze skin. Iron skin works on much the same principles as its parent spell, turning the user's skin to iron to increase the innate defensive value of their skin. As iron is a much better magic conductor than bronze, the dexterity debuff for this spell is a great deal less than the LV1 Bronze skin, invented by the Greeks shortly before the rise of Rome. Range, self, hardens skin to iron without inhibiting movement. While active, all skin has an armor rating of 25. While active, movement dex is reduced by 3%. While active, increase the damage dealt via hand-to-hand combat by 25. 25 MP to activate, 10 MP minute to remain active. Iron has a higher melting point than bronze, therefore the vulnerability to extended exposure to extreme heat has been reduced. Iron Body active LV1 0%. Tier 1. Invented by battle mages wishing to emulate a similar skill practiced by supernatural martial artists. This spell makes the user's muscles as hard as iron while mostly retaining their flexibility, resulting in a not inconsiderable increase to the user's physical defense. Range, self, hardens muscles to the density and hardness of iron whilst keeping most of the flexibility. While active, all areas with muscles possess natural armor of 10. While active, movement, dexterity is reduced by 7%. While active, increased damage dealt via hand-to-hand combat by 15. 20 MP to activate, 15 MP minute to maintain. Right now Issei was too focused on keeping an eye out for more purifiers to do more than take note of his newest skills. As long as he focused on what he had to do, he wouldn't think of unnecessary things and make the gamer's mind activate. 2 more patrols of 5 flames were eliminated by Issei as he advanced through the prison level. The way to the large experimental area was long, winding and pointlessly grim-looking, probably designed that way to terrify and intimidate prisoners, though it might also be some kind of security measure to slow down escapees. He'd activated the auto-looting system before he'd descended down to the prison level. That was one less distraction he'd have to worry about for now. Issei just wished that it didn't take all of their clothes. He did not need to see so many naked corpses. He was just glad that there were no women among the Purifier soldiers. He didn't want his first real-life look at a naked woman to be at a corpse. He was a pervert, but not that kind of pervert. There he is. The Flints stationed at the door leading to the elevator room had upgraded their equipment. Now they were wearing something similar to riot gear, similar to what SWAT wore in America, albeit with helmets remarkably similar to the Flames. They were also equipped with metal riot shields bearing the flame symbol of the Purifiers. Hem him in. Don't let him advance any further, the Flint, who seemed to be in command, shouted. As his order, the Flints spread out around Issei, encircling him and locking their shields together. Not a bad plan. Any normal person with just a couple swords would have trouble breaking out of this, but they forgot two things. 1. I'm not normal, the Seirkyude thought with a hidden smirk as he raised one sword to point directly at the Flint near the door leading further into the prison level. And 2, I don't just have my swords. Fireball. The flaming orb instantly formed at the blade's tip before shooting forward, slamming into the Purifier's shield. The Flint he'd targeted was sent flying backwards, and several of those around him were sent tumbling or slammed into the nearby walls. Before the shield wall could even hope to reform, Issei was in amongst them. His blades lashed out in a series of blurs, and in only a few moments the Flints were all dead. Issei absently flicked the blood and viscera off his sword before using a power blow enhanced kick to smash through the door into the rest of the prison and stepping within. The short corridor led him to the large room where the bloodstained tables stood. Issei was a seasoned gamer, even more so thanks to the gamer's gear, so he could easily recognize a boss room when he saw one. So when a large screen unveiled itself, showing SeerKing's sneering face, he wasn't terribly surprised. So, you're the little rat that's been running rampant through my base, the deranged scientist offered with an amused look, though Issei noticed the irritation simmering in his eyes. Apparently the guy really didn't like being interrupted when he was in the middle of screwing his equally deranged woman. Guess the guy upstairs had been right. SeerKing, your hour has come, Issei stated. For your crimes, death is your punishment. Crimes, you say? The scientist scoffed, sneering down at Issei. My work is for the benefit of all mankind. I will free humanity of the final chains holding it to the past. The so-called mysticism and superstition will be proven as nothing more than relics of a best-forgotten age. Humanity rules over this planet now. There's no longer a need for such archaic things like blessings and gods. If a few throwbacks have to die for humanity's apotheoses, then so be it. Issei was quickly getting sick of this nutbar's self-aggrandizing rant. Silence, lowly murderer. The gamer cut in coldly. Your words are as empty and soulless as the rest of you. You have the blood of the innocent staining your hands, and I shall make you pay for it. Before this day ends, you will die by my hands, I promise you that. SeerKing's sneer hardened as he glared down at Issei from his monitor. Really now, a superstitious throwback thinks he can judge me. I'd dearly like to see you try, you barbaric little ape. For now, feel free to test one of my prototypes. Deploy Project Cleansing Flame. Much to Issei's shock, the tables in the room withdrew into the ground, while an elevator deployed down from the ceiling, revealing. Okay, these bastards have really got to stop stealing ideas from video games. That's a goddamned YMIR match from Mass Effect 2, Issei thought with a growl of irritation. Indeed, the bipedal machine stood as tall as 2.5 fully grown men, massive arms and legs supporting a heavily armored torso, a round head with the distinctive figure of 8 red lights signifying the location of the sensors mounted in it. The armor of the machine was white, and emblazoned proudly with the burning flame of the Purifiers. Model 34 Iteration Alpha LV18. Project Cleansing Flame. They even used the same serial number. Shameless bastards, Issei thought. Then he focused on possible armaments. The YMIR mech had a pair of arm-mounted Mass Effect machine guns and a rocket launcher in the game, but this one was clearly different, as the arms had a pair of nozzles on each of them. Ones that looked familiar to something that the reanimated Bone Ripper had carried. Flamethrowers. The crazy bastard SeerKing had actually fitted a mech with flamethrowers. The damage and casualties that this thing could cause in an urban area like Kyoto Town were too horrific to even contemplate. And the insane idiot was currently gushing about how perfect it was and how no mere supernatural Neanderthal could defeat his precious baby or something like that. I will break this mechanical toy of yours, Purifier, Issei said abruptly, cutting the man off mid-rant. After I'm done, I'm sure you'll be all too happy to walk within reach of my swords. You think much of yourself, you outdated throwback. SeerKing snapped back. If, by some miracle, you manage to destroy my invention, rest assured I shall personally come down and dissect your broken form just to teach you a lesson for having the effrontery to stand in the way of your own species. Systems active, the machine stated in a dull monotone. For the sake of the purity of humanity and their souls, the unclean wielders of superstition and sorcery shall be cleansed in unrelenting flame. Assuming a stance, Issei recalled fighting the YMIR mechs in Mass Effect 2. They had a simple strategy: get in close and fire their machine guns from close range. With its machine guns replaced with a flamethrower, then that stopped being a preferred strategy and became a necessary one. Flamethrowers were dangerous weapons, but they were not known for their range. With all that heavy armor, I doubt it's going to have much in the way of speed or maneuverability. I'm going to have to stay on my toes if I don't want to end up barbecued, Issei thought as he examined the monstrous machine. Fortunately, the joints are exposed, just like in the game. With luck I can cut through them using power strikes. Engaging target. The YMIR knockoff droned and the nozzles at the ends of its arms snapped out a couple more inches. Instincts blaring and warning, Issei started running to the side, circling the machine. Just in time too, as a long gout of liquid fire shot out of the nozzles on both arms. The sheer heat of the nearby flames were enough to cause Issei to instantly break out in a sweat. Evade skill, don't let me down, he thought frantically. As the robot started to move around, still spraying napalm from its weapons, the gamer kept running around before using power leap to fly up and over the YMIR knockoff, landing behind it. Whirling around, Issei used 2 power strikes to smash his swords into the exposed knee joints of the mech, which was actually somewhat ineffective. It took 2 more before the right knee joint sent out sparks and the large robot staggered slightly. Model 34 Iteration Alpha right knee joint has been damaged. The lame debuff has been inflicted. Minus 50% movement with the leg in question. Whoa. Issei yelped as the arms swung around to point behind the mech and spewed yet more napalm. He barely managed to dodge away in time. As a result of repeated actions. Not now, damn it. The Seirkyude growled, swiping the window away hurriedly. He didn't need distractions. Raising one sword up, he shouted, let's see if you like a taste of your own medicine, you tin can. Explosive combustion sphere. The largest orb he could make flashed into appearance above him before being sent at the limping mech with a gesture of his sword. The explosion actually sent Issei stumbling back a few steps. He'd been a bit too close when he'd fired that spell. You have lost 50 HP. What have you done? Tenkyujo roared, shaking his head to rid himself of the ringing in his ears. Issei blinked as the YMIR knockoff shambled out of the cloud of smoke. Left arm gone and right arm smashed, the body armor cracked and fractured. I have neither the time nor the interest to play with your cheap toys, Purifier, Issei stated as he used 2 more explosive combustion sphere spells, both a bit weaker than the first, to avoid any more blowback to blow the machine to pieces. Before it finally blew up, Issei managed to scan it with observe. Despite its level, the mech was actually really weak stat-wise, and it was suffering a debuff called unfitted armor that lowered its armor's defense. It had really been an alpha prototype, a test bed for the machinery to make sure it could work together, but none of the fine-tuning or upgrades needed to make it field ready. You have defeated Model 34 Iteration Alpha. You receive 1000 EXP. As a result of, not now, already, Issei muttered as he looked up at the furious face of Tenkyujo Arima on the wall screen. You ... you insect. You damned underdeveloped, apish, irrational throwback. The scientist snarled before, slamming a hand down on his console. All forces, eliminate the intruder. Kill him. Shoot him. A bit of static crackled across the screen, momentarily distracting Tenkyujo. What do you mean the guns aren't working? Huh? You rodent, what did you fucking do? Showing you just how much your vaunted progress is truly worth. Issei replied tauntingly. Now, if you refuse to come to me, I'll be coming for you. So, will you walk to execution like a man, or try and escape judgment like a coward? Oh, I'll be right down there, Tenkyujo growled, one eye twitching furiously. Just you wait, you primitive barbarian. I'll make you beg for death by the time I'm done with you. With that, the screen cut out and was covered by the wall once again. Issei quickly checked the window to see what he'd gotten as a result of the last fight. In summary, he'd gotten the heat resistance skill, which reduced the damage he took from excessive heat, as well as several level ups to evade, bringing it to level 6. Explosive combustion sphere had also leveled up twice, making it level 3. He'd also received a bunch of tungsten fragments and forged steel fragments from killing the mech, which he was certain was just par for the course, given that the boss had been so weak. Whatever, substandard loot from a substandard boss. You got that kind of thing in games every so often. Crushing another MP potion to refill his MP, Issei was pleasantly surprised to see another screen pop up. As a result of repeated actions, the skill Lesser MP Regeneration has been learned. Lesser MP Regeneration passive LV1, 0%. The MP analog to Lesser HP Regeneration. This skill restores a set amount of MP per minute. The higher the level, the more MP is regained per minute. Automatically restores 3 MP minute. Very useful, especially since his fighting style was using more and more MP these days. It would certainly make keeping his MP level up easier. Just as he dismissed the window, a pair of large hatches opened in the ceiling and 2 massive metallic forms dropped down out of them, slamming to the ground and actually making it shudder, making Issei stumble back. When he regained his balance, the boy deadpanned at the 2 machines revealed. "Oh, come on," he groaned. "Atlas mechs now. Can any of you purifiers do anything without ripping off a game franchise?" "Silence, ape." Tenkyujo's voice came from the loudspeakers on one of the war mechs. "These devices are truly perfected war machines. Unlike my cleansing flame, these judging fists have entered mass production. In the war to come, these crystallizations of mankind's wisdom and knowledge shall lead the charge." Judging Fist 0LV25. Personal War Mech of Tenkyujo Arima. Judging Fist 1LV25. Personal War Mech of Rakania. "Unsurprised that your strumpet had the courage to face me," Issei observed airily as he took in the 2 machines. "Last I saw her, she pissed herself in fear at the very sight of me." "Shut up." Nia's outraged voice came from the other mecha. "How dare you bring that up? I'm going to crush you." As the woman raged at him, Issei calmly appraised the armaments on the 2 mecha. In Mass Effect 3, Atlas mechs were equipped with a mass accelerator cannon, basically a railgun in one arm, a grabber claw in the other, as well as a back-mounted rocket launcher, smoke grenade launcher. These ones were clearly geared for close combat. The railgun had been swapped out for a massive clenched fist, while the claw was swapped out for a long, curved blade. And unlike in the game, Issei kind of doubted that these things had an element 0 core to allow it to blitz someone in a charge with its thrusters, so that it hopefully meant their speed would be severely limited. "My swords won't be as useful here. Not only are there no open joints like the YMIR knockoff, and, if they're mass-produced models like the raving asshole stated, then I doubt they'd have the same debuff either," Issei decided as he pulled both blades back into his inventory for safekeeping. "Guess this is going to be a match of magic versus technology." "What's this? Are you giving up already?" Tenkyujo asked arrogantly. Issei's response was to raise a single hand towards the man's machine. Explosive combustion sphere. The spell lashed out from his hand and slammed into the machine, but unfortunately the resulting explosion barely managed to rock the machine. "It's useless, you lesser primate," Tenkyujo sneered. "The armor of these mechs is resilient enough to shrug off a direct hit from a tank's main cannon. Your superstitious claptrap can't harm it." "Is that so? I suppose that means I'll just have to hit harder than a tank cannon," Issei stated simply before he started blasting both mechs with burning bomb and explosive combustion sphere spells. To give credit where it was due, the mech's armor, particularly the transparent covering protecting the cockpit, was truly impressive. If Issei's memory was correct, then the original Atlas mechs had armor that was highly resistant to thermal attacks, so perhaps relying on fire magic wasn't the best idea. Unfortunately, he didn't have many options outside his fire magic and earth shot that could. "Oh, now there was a good idea. Earth shot," he shouted, activating spell manipulation at the same time and focusing on reshaping the projectiles, condensing and sharpening them into hardened arrowheads of stone rather than simple stones. It worked, surprisingly well, actually. It was a total rip-off of Major Alex Louis Armstrong's artistic alchemic cannon technique from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, but he would always state where he got the inspiration for it if asked. If these Purifier bastards could steal from video games, he felt justified in copying a few tricks from anime. The newly formed projectiles shot forward like a bullet, moving even faster than his normal earth shot, and smashed right into the armored left knee of Rakania's mecha, causing far more damage than any of his fire spells he'd tried recently. Either he'd been right about the mechs having heat-resistant armor or his new spell was even more potent than he thought. "What?" Nia screamed as the armor covering her suit's knee-jointed cracked and broke away. "Armor piercing for the win," Issei whispered with a grin as he eyed the new window floating before him. "As a result of your use of spell manipulation, the Tier 2 spell Rock Missile has been added to your spellbook. Rock Missile Instant LV1, 0%. Tier 2, an advanced version of the Tier 1 spell Earth Shot. The stone used to form this projectile is far more condensed than normal, giving it a greater weight than its size would suggest. Additionally, it is shaped into a spike, allowing it to have more penetrative power when dealing with armor, making this the perfect spell to use on those enemies who cower behind physical armor. The only downside is that it had a relatively large MP cost for a Tier 2 spell. Costs 70 MP. creates a compacted arrowhead of rock that inflicts INTXWISX2 damage on the enemy it strikes. Against any enemies it strikes with armor, natural armor, or in kind of non-magic based armor of any kind. The damage from the strike is increased by a multiple of 1.5, and the armor's durability suffers from double the damage. That decided it. He was so going to start training his earth magic just as much as his fire magic from now on. I'm going to murder you, you little bastard. Nia howled before the fist of her Atlas mech was launched at Issei. He barely managed to dodge it before his evade skill kicked in, making him somersault his way out of the path of another one from Tenkyujo's mech. Praise be to the bullshit skill. Responding in kind, Issei fired off 2 more rock missile spells to force the madman back before focusing his efforts on Nia. He'd already gotten a good idea of her character, and the woman was an utter rodent. If he killed Tenkyujo first, she'd flee like a rat from a sinking ship, and he wasn't willing to bet that she didn't have some escape pod or getaway planned. Therefore, she was going to die first. Much to Issei's surprise, the fists that were launched at him were still attached to the mech via a long cable that quickly wound them back to their respective mechs once they'd lost their velocity, which was somewhat irritating. In between casting rock missile and running, he had to dodge repeated uses of those rocket punches and the occasional slash from those arm blades whenever one of them managed to get in close. So far, he'd managed to avoid any serious hits. A few near misses, but the combination of his defensive spells and his own armor had kept them from doing anything more than nicking his HP. Still, it was even more obvious now that letting them land even a single solid hit would be a bad thing. Stand still, Tenkyujo snarled as Issei dodged away from yet another rocket punch. What kind of slobbering moron would actually do that? Issei jeered as he crushed another MP potion before casting more rock missiles at Nia's mecha, which was starting to look like it had been badly mauled. Several large holes and tears were dotting the chassis, and several sections of its armor had been completely broken away. Oil and other liquids were leaking from several of the damaged sections, and the machine was moving noticeably slower than before, stalling in its movements every time it tried to move more than a slight twitch. "Eat this, you brat," Nia howled in annoyance. A soft "phut" sound came from the top of her mech, and an orb was fired into the air from a section of its back. Issei immediately leapt back from its targeted landing zone. In case it was a gas grenade of some kind, he wouldn't put it past either of these sociopaths to load out their mechs with poison gas, but it was evidently a more conventional explosive and thus had been rendered completely inert by his gunpowder nullification field generator. "You first," Issei snarled back, firing off one more rock missile while Nia was still stunned by her bomb turning out to be a dud. The earthen projectile slammed into the machine's cockpit, which had already been cracked by an earlier shot, and completely shattered it. Nia squawked in shocked outrage as her mech started to shudder and flail. Whatever restraints were keeping her anchored in the cockpit seemed to fail as it buckled forward, launching her face first onto the cold metal ground as her machine collapsed behind her. The Sekiryude didn't hesitate for a moment, quickly advancing on the woman. One hand fired another rock missile to keep Tenkyujo at bay while the other pulled out Itari's hammer from his belt. "Ho ho, so it's that woman first, eh?" The dwarven spirit's voice was dark and vengeful as it echoed in Issei's ears. "She laughed at me as I died, time she paid the price." "With pleasure," Issei responded grimly. The woman was as much a sadistic sociopath as Tenkyujo. Her poison gas could have murdered the entirety of Kyoto Town if he hadn't disposed of it. That alone earned her a death sentence. The fact that she'd gleefully joined in her twisted boyfriend's experiments meant that, woman or not, Issei wouldn't hesitate to put her down. "Ew," Nia groaned as she sat up. Her nose was definitely broken and it was bleeding pretty badly. "How dare you? For once in your life, shut up," the teen ordered as he raised his hammer and brought it down on the female scientist's head with all of his strength. "Nia, NOOO," Tenkyujo screamed as the cruel, sadistic, and cowardly woman died beneath Issei's weapon. "And then there was one," Issei stated coldly, holstering the hammer once more as he turned to confront the last Atlas mech. You. Tenkyujo Arama seemed to be so furious that he was beyond words. "I am going to tear you apart limb from limb for this. I'll flense your skin and flesh from your bones and keep you alive and awake while I do it. I will make you regret the day your troglodyte parents sired you." "Talk is cheap, Tenkyujo," the gamer said lightly. "Put your money where your mouth is or just sit back and let me kill you. I may not look like it, but I am a very busy person. I don't have all day to deal with you. Bring it on." Chapter 17, Aftermath and Allies. Tenkyujo Arama teeth were grinding together so hard that Issei could have probably heard them without the speakers. The deranged scientist was practically frothing at the mouth as he stared down at the impudent worm that had dared to violate his personal realm. his bastion against the foolishness of superstition, and had even had the gall to murder his woman, a lowly, underdeveloped Neanderthal, a throwback of a magic user no less, had dared to not only invade his citadel of logic and science, profaning it with his mere presence, but had defiled and destroyed so many of his resources it would take him years to recover. I was hoping that I wouldn't need to deploy this system until I could let it develop a bit further, but I have to kill this little bastard, regardless of the cost. Tenkyujo growled within his own mind, before quickly using his right hand and smashing a fragile plexiglass panel labeled PFS and mashing down the button beneath. The response was immediate. An alarm began blaring throughout every corner of the base as the damage-judging fist mecha, otherwise known as a knockoff of the Atlas mech from Mass Effect 3, quickly began to maneuver itself towards the very center of the room, making sure to keep the red-clad figure of Arama's personal nemesis at bay with its rocket fist. Perfect Form System D has been initiated. Lockdown of all facility assets has commenced. A bland, mechanical voice echoed over the base's speakers. Lockdown complete. All non-essential systems have been deactivated. All facility power is being diverted to Perfect Form System. Systems activating in 3.2.1.0. Perfect Form System D is activating. As if acting on cue, the arms of Arama's mech were quickly jettisoned, allowing a set of cables deployed from wall mounts to lock into place in their vacated housing just seconds before the floor opened up beneath him, and both Arama and his mech were quickly lowered out of sight, and the air was filled with the sound of whirling, grinding, and shrieking machinery. Meanwhile, Issei just stood there, watching like an idiot. Though it wasn't by choice. He might not be the brightest bulb, but even he was smart enough that interrupting a transformation into a more powerful form was just plain common sense when you're dealing with robots like this. Unfortunately, his body had frozen when Arama's mech had lost its arms, and he had a screen floating in front of his nose explaining why. Boss transformation scene. During a boss transformation scene, you cannot move to attack it, and will be frozen should you attempt to do so. Should it prove dangerous for you to not be mobile while the transformation is occurring, you will be permitted basic movement only. Of all the stupid, frustrating bullcrap for the gaming gear to have taken from RPGs, it just had be this damnable stupidity. The most irritating, illogical, and plainly stupid part of any multi-form boss fight, being completely unable to stop or counter it. The worst was in Final Fantasy X, when you were facing Yunelska, watching a hot woman change into a giant zombifying Medusa head thing had been nothing short of torturous for the young pervert. His pet peeve aside, Issei was honestly a little curious about what was coming next. Would Tenkyujo Arama actually show some originality and pull out something he actually invented himself? Or would the so-called genius just end up copying another game mecha? And if so, which one? As Issei pondered while caught in the grips of his sacred gear's side effects, the sounds of machinery continued to build from below him until, with a great metallic clang, something extended upwards out of hole that Arama's mech had descended down. That something being a massive, skeletal arm made of some form of dull gray metal, half complete and ending in a sharp nub halfway up where a normal human forearm would be, and covered in veins of dark black tubing. Seconds later, the other half of the floor started falling away, allowing the arm nub to anchor itself into the ground and pull the rest of its form up and out of the pit. Emerging was the remainder of the upper half of human skeleton, grown to simply massive scale that reached up to the room's ceiling. The metallic skull glared downward with glaring red headlights, 2 in its left eye and a single one in the other, and a large cannon of some kind emerging from its mouth. The chest cavity was filled with a massive collection of black tubing, whirling bits of machinery, and another glowing red light. Worse, the thing was still growing. Issei could see the right arm hanging loosely over the edge as several machines seemed to work to finish it. Look forward and behold your end, worthless throwback. Tenkyujo Arama declared loudly, his voice echoing via loudspeakers from somewhere within the mechanical monstrosity he'd created. This is the culmination of my work, the very embodiment of science's power over the ancient, outdated superstitions of this world. My magnum opus, the anti-sacred gear mobile weapon, Damocles. Yua, he's a Chunibyo. Shaking away the weird thought, Issei's eyes locked on the blood-red word and numbers floating over the behemoth's head. The damn thing looked pretty damn familiar too. Project Damocles LV-35. Incomplete anti-sacred gear mobile weapon. The Sword of Purity. Oi, that's the fucking human reaper from Mass Effect 2. Issei roared in annoyance. Stop stealing shit from my favorite games. Are you really that pathetic that you can't come up with anything original, you fucking hack? Silence, Tenkyujo shrieked. You shall pay for your insolence with your life, cretin. The cannon barrel jutting from the rip-off Reaper's jaws suddenly started to glow, a bright crimson light gathering within as the machine prepared to fire. Hell no, am I letting you shoot me with whatever that is? Issei snarled back, raising his gladius to point the tip at one of the monstrous machine's eye sockets. Here's some advice, you 2-bit hack. The main problem with blatantly ripping off an endgame boss like this is that any gamer worth their salt knows all of its weak spots and how to exploit them. Rock missile. The stone projectile shot forward an instant later, flying towards the human Reaper, Project Damocles. Monster rip off in the blink of an eye and slamming into the massive machine's eye socket, shattering one of the lights and causing the massive machine to reel back, orange and red sparks spewing from the damaged energy port. What? No. Improbable. How? Harem shrieked as he tried to regain control of his machine. My masterpiece has a barrier system. Your archaic trick shouldn't have been able to so much as scratch it. Maybe you should have built that first then, dumbass. The Seirkyude snarked back as he raised his sword again. Flame spear, explosive combustion sphere, fireball. Issei belted out all 3 of his best fire spells, each slamming into Project Damocles in quick succession. Although they apparently did little more than leave a few scorch marks along its chassis, they were still a good enough distraction to give Issei time to line up his next shot with his newest attack spell. Rock missile. A loud shout sent another spike of rock flying towards the massive skeleton's other eye, but the machine barely managed to bring its newly finished right arm up and around in order to deflect the projectile with a loud clang. Issei grit his teeth when he noticed that the machine's was now working on building its left arm. Well, that wouldn't do, would it? Scowling beneath his menpo, Issei shot forward, rushing toward the edge of the remaining floor. Quickly aiming downward over the edge without even getting a chance to look, he let out a quick barrage of explosive combustion spheres down over the edge before he was forced to leap back as the machine's right arm tried to swat him like a fly. Apparently, there was something highly combustible in whatever workshop was hidden down there, because seconds after Issei leapt back, he was rewarded with a loud chain reaction of explosions shaking the floor beneath him. The machinery working to assemble Damocles' left arm quickly shuddered to a halt, a couple falling over while the rest simply dropped limply where they hanging, smoke spewing from their joints. As an added bonus, Project Damocles assembler deactivated and frozen due to catastrophic damage. Left arm 70% impaired and only 40% assembled. Hey ha ... real world exploits for the win. Filthy ape. How dare you lay your filthy hands on my masterpiece? Harem howled in fury over the loudspeakers. You dare hamper my magnum opus with your archaic magic tricks. Know your place, you worthless piece of refuse. Are you kidding me? Talk about new car owner's syndrome. Issei's sweat dropped at the shrieking idiot. What? Did he expect me to just stare in awe as he squashed me? Is this guy an idiot or something? Perhaps it was something in his body language, but something about Issei's inner monologue seemed to send Tenkyujo into a frothing fury. Don't you look down on me, you pathetic, low-born monkey. Well, crap, Issei muttered as the sole complete arm of the giant robot drew back, intent on punching him through the floor. Even if it missed, the thing would likely collapse most of the floor and send him tumbling into whatever flaming mess he'd caused down below. Screw this. No more holding back with this whack job. Boosted gear. Boost. Ha, so you possess one of those ancient crutches. It doesn't matter, my Project Damocles was created specifically to counter those archaic relics. The mad scientist cackled, activating sacred gear suppression system. The glow from whatever object was embedded into the giant machine's chest cavity suddenly flared up and changed color, shifting from a low crimson glow to a bright, eye-searing flare of blue light that quickly washed over Issei. As it did, he felt something try and affect his sacred gears, like a cold breeze trying to seep its way into his very soul. Minor, lesser, weak, unstable sacred gear suppression field is attempting to suppress the boosted gear and gaming gear. Boost. The boosted gear has repelled its efforts. Game on. The gamer's gear has repelled its efforts, until both his gears flared up briefly, shattering the effect like spun glass. He could practically hear the gobsmacked expression spreading across Harem's face as his masterpiece failed to do anything. TFF ... FT ... Issei tried valiantly to hold it in. Give ha, but he just couldn't. He threw his head back and started laughing uproariously, the voice-changing effect of his cloak clasp causing the ensuing sound to come out sinister and freaky to even his own ears. Impossible. My masterwork should have shattered those relics into dust. Harem screamed out. It took a moment for Gamer's mind to reassert itself and bring Issei's mirth under control again. As his laugh died, he grinned viciously beneath his face mask. You utter and complete idiot. I hold in my possession one of the 13 Longinus and a second gear that only a step beneath them in terms of power. Your so-called magnum opus wouldn't have done much against a common sacred gear, let alone these two. Impossible, impossible, impossible. Harem shrieked over and over again in rage. The power of science can't be conquered by some outdated piece of garbage. Some humans just don't know when to shut up. A familiar voice growled from the back of his head as the scientist's voice dissolved into mad litany of curses and technobabble. Deedreg. The young Securute blinked in surprise. Yo, partner, I've been watching you at work tonight. The Welch dragon replied evenly. Wanted to make sure you didn't need any help getting your pretty little friend out safe. You've done well so far. Now all you need to do is make that this pathetic little ape dies tonight. I can practically smell the innocent blood soaked into that madman's hands, partner. He needs putting down hard. Heh. Issei smiled grimly as he stared forward at the abomination piloted by a madman. You're not telling me anything I didn't already know, Deedreg. Bastard's already dead. His body just hasn't realized it. Deciding he'd let the not-so-good scientist rant for long enough, Issei raised his gladius once more and fired another rock missile at its remaining eye. This time, with its master preoccupied with his mental breakdown, the machine couldn't block in time, causing the machine to once more reel back in a shower of red and orange sparks. The thing really was mimicking the human Reaper to an almost impossible degree. Whether that was because of his sacred gear, or just Harem's lazy designing, Issei honestly didn't know and didn't care at the moment. Phew, Harem howled, the sudden spasming knocking him out of his rant. I don't care if I have to bring this entire building down on the both us, but I will kill you. Overdrive. The black tubes covering the skeletal abomination suddenly started glowing a deep red before all the energy started flowing upward, towards its mouth cannon. It was supercharging the damn thing in order to power it up faster. Partner, I think it's time to teach you a new trick. Focus on our gear and boost again. Deedreg ordered him. Hope you know what you're doing, Deedreg. Issei thought as he did as instructed. Raising his hand up in front of his body, Issei focused and then, boost. Now focus. Materialize the energy generated by your boosts, and form it into an orb in front of your hand. The Dragon Emperor continued calmly. Focusing, Issei envisioned an orb of crimson energy manifesting in front of his hand. In a flare of bright red light, a tiny little orb, no larger than a thumbnail, formed in front of his palm. Trust me, partner, that right there is concentrated draconic energy mixed with your own magic. Size really doesn't mean everything in this case. Deedreg responded smugly. Mwahaha. And what is that minuscule thing supposed to do? Harem cackled over the speakers. Let me show you what true power looks like. The power of science conquering your ancient superstitions once and for all. Be returned to nothing. Punch it. Deedreg roared back from within Issei's head. Here goes nothing. Issei shouted aloud, rearing his left arm back, hand clenched tightly into a fist, before he sent his best punch forward with everything he had from his stats and enhancement magic. Die! Harem screamed out as a massive blast of red light erupted from the mouth of the cannon, barreling straight toward Issei just as his punch impacted the small ball of draconic power. Explosion. Issei barely noticed the new declaration from boosted gear. Instead, he was more focused on how the tiny ball of crimson energy erupted with a roar that sounded like it could have come straight from the beast sealed within the gear itself. The droplet of pure energy detonated as Issei's fist impacted, erupting into a massive torrent of pure red energy that met the laser cannon's blast head-on, meeting it halfway between man and machine. The two beams connected and, for a brief moment, struggled for supremacy before the human Reaper knockoff's beam shattered into dozens of small beams, all of which were sent flying backwards into the machine from the force of Issei's impromptu technique. The smaller beams riddled the machine's chassis, scoring and gouging dozens of fine lines and small holes into its head, torso, and arms. Issei's own blast, however, had barely been slowed by the brief conflict and continued to barrel forward, impacting the beam cannon itself a moment later and completely engulfing it before the entire head was consumed in one large explosion. Shaking his head in hopes of clearing his hearing after the sudden explosion, the gamer felt his jaw unhinge slightly as he stared at not just the large machine now missing its head, but also the massive, round holes in the wall and ceiling directly behind Project Damocles. Reset. Imp. Hio. Monster. Abomination. Tenkyujo rasped out, voice trembling even through the damaged, static-ridden speakers. Such power ... from a gauntlet of all things. Simply impossible. It goes against the very groundworks of all science, the laws of reality. You unnatural freak. Boost. Science isn't the answer to everything in this world, Tenkyujo. Issei smiled grimly as boosted gear once more began to hum to life. Nor should it be. The world is a big place, full of secrets and mysteries that no one, human, monster, or god, can truly answer. It's searching for those answers that makes life worth living. If you are hoping to codify the world into neat little boxes, then what I'm going to do to you will simply be putting a fool out of his misery. Boost. Superfluous nonsense. Science is the key to understanding all of the world in a purely logical and detached manner. Tenkyujo sneered back, regaining some measure of his control, though his voice was still trembling. There is no need for such superstitious tripe like faith and magic. Science and logic are all that humanity needs now, and with it we will grind the worthless remnants of the bygone era under heel. I will not let a single, worthless throwback, who mocks our species' advancement with his reliance on those ancient relics, to stand in my way. Boost. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Bring on. Issei roared right back. For science. The deranged scientist howled. Project Damocles drew back its only fully functional arm before sending a punch straight at Issei with a fist bigger than he was. Power leap. Ryukin, the gamer called out, launching himself forward as he brought the boosted gear back and clenched his fist. A bright red aura suffused the dragon scale gauntlet, quickly forming the shape of a dragon's head around his fist. Explosion. When both he and the fist were within arm's reach of each other, Issei unleashed the full power of his boosted Ryukin at the mech, the roar of an angry dragon accompanying its release. Freed from the constraints of his fist and magnified by the power of the boosted gear, the dragon head swelled up to the size of a cart horse before it impacted the incoming fist, colliding with an indescribably cacophony of sound as ancient draconic energy fought against the power of modern machinery. And no, this can't be happening, started screaming as his monstrosity's arm began to buckle and crack. My Masterworks armor is a titanium coltan alloy that can withstand anti-tank rounds without damage. The servo muscles have enough power that a single punch can destroy the walls of a fortified bunker in a single strike. That punch had more power than 155mm howitzer shell. This isn't even remotely possible. Because wretch, my partner does not fight alone. D-Drake spoke aloud, his voice echoing across the room from the boosted gear. He has the power of the Red Dragon Emperor fighting alongside him. More than that, he fights with all his heart and soul to protect those he cares for. Your soulless science can't even hope to compare. One more thing, you bastard. Issei growled out as the cracks and fractures coating the machine's arm began to expand and widen. One of the girls you were getting ready to torment was Asia Argento. She's already suffered enough for no reason. And like hell am I going to let a scumbag like you torment her just because of your own fucking insecurities? Go to hell. With another air-splitting roar, the dragon of crimson energy finally overcame its opposition, washing over and ripping the metallic construct to shreds as it overtook the entirety of Damocles' arm before continuing onward. Then the onrushing draconic projectile reared back for its final strike. Realizing just what was about to happen, Issei quickly raised his blade again. Lesser barrier shield. A bright red barrier of energy snapped into place in front of him not a second too late. As the glowing projectile impacted the monstrous machine's right shoulder, it detonated in an explosion that shook the very foundations around them, causing debris and dust to rain from the ceiling. Behind his barrier, Issei winced at the sound as he struggled to keep his feet as the ground shook beneath him and his barrier was assaulted by a wave of scorching hot air and a storm of flying debris so heavy that it left several cracks across the barrier's surface. After several long moments, the shaking stopped and the dust started to settle, allowing Issei to peek through his shield and look at what had happened to Project Damocles. He couldn't hold back the low whistle as he saw the damage done. The robot looked like it had been gutted. The entirety of its right arm was gone, along with its right shoulder and a large portion of its chest. The head was already scrap metal, and the half-finished remnants of its left arm had been broken off by the explosion. The section of the chest that remained had been ripped open by the force of the explosion, exposing its inner working to the world, including the top section of the Atlas knockoff that housed Tenkyujo Arima, which was formerly locked into the machine's neck, and the large, sparking orange orb that had been set within the center of Monstrosity's chest. Reset. Wa.no.impos. This can't. Unnet. The Purifier scientist was at a loss for words, either too shocked to form a coherent thought, or simply incapable of voicing them aloud. Whatever it was, the villain was blue screening, and that meant that there was only one thing to do. Earth shot, Earth shot, Earth shot, Issei stated calmly, pointing his gladius at the sparking orb that rested in the center of the Damocles' chest cavity. The earthen missiles sailed across the distance between the 2 points and slammed into the last weak point of the massive machine without any signs of resistance. Each impact cracked and rattled the orb, leaving it looking one good jolt from shattering completely. Why, Nuo, you fool, what have you done? Tenkyujo shrieked in panic as orange lightning began to dance across the spasming remnants of Project Damocles. You've destabilized the power core. It's linked directly to the generators that power the entire base. If it goes up, the backlash will result in a chain reaction will destroy the entire facility. You don't say. Issei responded smugly, a sharp smirk spreading across his lips. Well, that will certainly save me some time. I thought I was going to have to trigger the self-destruct system to wipe this place off the map. Now I suppose all I need is to do is finish you off. Never. I will not die to a throwback like you. The scientist bellowed back in panic. Seconds later, several explosive bolts went off around the Judging Fist mecha's docking station, releasing it from the down mech and allowing the smaller mecha to detach. Or rather, it allowed a part of it to detach, the cockpit section disconnecting itself from the rest of the mech and propelling itself away using a small host of rockets mounted to its undercarriage. Issei was rendered momentarily speechless as he stared up at the most blatant rip-off yet. The bastard was now copying Dr. Robotnik. Oh, how he had hated that damned egg mobile. When he was a kid, that stupid escape pod had made him spit in anger every time the round bastard had managed to make a quick getaway with it, especially after he'd put in so much effort to take him down. If that deranged bastard thought that he was just going to let him imitate that egg-shaped stooge, then he had another thing coming. Issei didn't need a two-tailed fox to take to the skies. Quickly pulling out and crushing another MP potion, Issei charged forward. Power leap, he roared out as he launched himself into the air, slamming into the escape pod and stabbing both of his swords into the metal siding to himself anchored. Get off, Arima screamed as Issei finally got another look at him through the armored canopy. Gone was the cold, detached, and menacing scientist that had been so sure of his superiority when he first appeared. His hair was messy and bedraggled. He was sweating profusely, leaving dark stains on his jacket and pants. His eyes were bloodshot and were flickering about frantically, and a look of fear, unease, and disbelief had long replaced the haughty condescension that he'd been carrying before. The moment he'd caught sight of Issei, he'd instantly flinched away, curling away in a way that made Issei pause for a moment. Tenkyujo Arima was honestly and literally terrified of him. And because of that, the scientist didn't react in the way he'd expected, the most likely being trying to ram him into a wall, and instead went with a more instinctive response to that fear: run away. The madman quickly adjusted his controls, sending the pod up and out through the hole in the ceiling. A hole that went far further than Issei had expected, carving straight through the base and leaving a large hole into the decoy building above. This would have been far more interesting if Issei wasn't struggling to hang on for dear life. That was made even harder as the pod started ramming through the floors of office building that hid the base, showering him with rubble and debris, though he was thankfully not on the tip that was ramming through. GHRRK. The Sekyude grunted as he tried to keep hold on his sword despite the air pressure, and rubble pelted him as the escape pod flew ever upward. Fireball. Just as the pod broke through the roof of the Pure Drains building, Issei managed to cast his spell through his swords, directly into the pod's machinery. Sparks and tongues of flame briefly erupted from the gouges left by his blades for a moment as the entire began to shake violently as delicate electronics were blown apart or melted by a sudden introduction of fire. Are you mad? You'll kill us both. Tenkyujo shrieked out as the pod began to dip and lose momentum. The scientist struggled for several moments to compensate for the damaged systems, with little success as the craft began to lose altitude, steadily falling towards what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Heh, Issei grunted out. I don't plan on dying today, Tenkyujo. What about you? The scientist began to howl out a half-intelligible stream of invectives, curses, and similar insults at Issei as the escape pod smashed through the, fortunately dilapidated, roof of the warehouse. The pod crashed into the concrete floor with a bone-jarring crunch of metal and shattered glass, the impact throwing Issei loose and causing him to careen through the interior of the building for a few minutes before he slammed into what a momentarily glance before impact had identified as a septic tank. A thankfully empty and unused one, otherwise Issei would have been very, very upset. You have lost 75 HP. Oh, he groaned out dully as he pulled himself out of the mess of plastic and metal that had cushioned his fall. By the time he was free of the wreckage, Tenkyujo Arima had also managed to pry his way out of his now useless escape pod. The man was in an even worse shape than before. His hair was now a matted mess thanks to a cut on his brow leaking a steady stream of blood to cake and tangle his hair. His hands were shaking as he crawled out of the pod, and several more injuries were obvious across his tattered clothes. He was the very image of a rat attempting to flee a sinking ship. Monster. Monster. The deranged scientist was trembling in rage and feet. All my research, all my work, all my accomplishments, all gone in a puff of smoke. Almost 100 of my men dead. All because of you. I wasn't planning on letting anything of that charnel house survive in the first place. Issei replied coldly, pushing down the twinge he felt as he learned exactly how many people were going to die. Before anything else could be said, the deafening roar of an explosion came from the direction of the building they'd just escaped, followed by a sudden wave of hot air and air pressure that shattered the already broken windows of the warehouse and forced both survivors to stagger in order to remain standing. And now, all that's left is you, the SeerKing announced icily, dismissing both the boosted gear and the gamer's gear. He wouldn't need them now, and he had something else in mind for finishing Tenkyujo. You should make peace with whatever god you follow, Purifier, though I doubt any would accept a monster like you. No, 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 the scientist shrieked out, shaking his head violently. My work will not end here, not by someone like you. Reaching into his lab coat, he pulled out something that looked vaguely like a modified taser. The man quickly raised it with shaky hands and pulled the trigger. Lesser barrier shield, Issei announced, sounding almost bored. A red circle sprang into existence just as the prongs of the stun device shot out. They hit the shield with a soft click, feebly sparking with electricity for a moment as they bounced off and fell to the ground pathetically. Tenkyujo merely stared, wide-eyed and twitching. Is that it? Because I'm honestly getting tired of this little game. Purifier, it's time for this to end. The gamer stated coldly as he pulled Issei's hammer from his belt. Oh, so you finally managed to corner that little rat? Issei's spirit asked, a sense of anticipation echoing through his mental voice. Oh, I've been looking forward to this for too long. No, I can't die. It's my destiny to bring humanity forward. I can't die. Not to a throwback like you. The scientist shrieked as he backed away, before turning tail and running toward the nearest window. Power strike, Issei spat out, a red glow encompassing the hammer as he drew it back and threw it with everything he had. The heavy blacksmith's hammer spun end over end for a brief moment before the head slammed into the back of Tenkyujo-Arama's head with a sound similar to both someone striking a side of meat and to the sound of a watermelon being smashed. The Purifier scientist dropped to the ground like a stone, visceral matter and blood weeping from the caved-in remnants of the man's head. Quick, quiet, and ignominious, I'm sure the bastard would have hated it. Issei summarized idly as he walked toward the corpse and hammer. Good. As moved to pick up the gore-stained hammer, the Gaia gamer nearly went cross-eyed as he was suddenly hit with a deluge of notification across his entire field of vision. After a moment to get his head back on straight, he quickly started to organize into some rough sense of order. First, he took a look at his quest notifications. Quest complete. A dragon gamer to save the damsels. You have successfully saved Asia Argento, Kuryu Eika, Abe Kiyom, Murayama Keiko, Kades Ryuko and the unknown boy from the clutches of the Purifiers, as well as putting the Purifier base and everyone in it to the sword. Well done. Quest Reward 1, plus 10,000 yen improved relationship with Asia Argento. Quest Reward 2, improved relationship with Kuryu Eika, Abe Kiyom, Murayama Keiko, Kades Ryuko and Burning Head Skill Book. Quest Reward 3, at war relationship status with the Purifiers, 50,000 yen refined blood metal greaves, refined blood metal bracers, refined blood metal masked helm, mystery box. Hidden objective number 1 reward blind deaf and dumb, Infiltrator title, plus 50,000 yen plus 10,000 EXP, summoning token. Hidden objective number 2 reward fortifying inside a fortress, Saboteur title, Anchor Howl skill book, Fortress Stance skill book. Hidden objective number 3 reward due to the dead, Rememberer title, Basic blacksmithing skill book, Basic runesmithing skill book. Quest complete. Dwarven grudge from beyond the grave, you have exacted revenge upon Rakania and Tenkyujo-Arama on behalf of Issei Brockison. May they receive what they deserve in the afterlife. Quest Reward 1, 6,000 EXP, 10,000 yen Fist of the Beast King skill book. Quest Reward 2, a body for a blacksmith quest unlocked, 6,000 EXP, 10,000 yen Blood Woven Cape and Cowl. Optional Quest Reward number 1, X10 Meteoric Iron Ingots. Optional Quest Reward number 2, X5 Mithril Shards, X1 Orichalcum Dust Pouch. Hot damn, that is a lot of objectives completed. Issei whistled out. I'm honestly still amazed I managed to do all of that. If someone had told me a couple months ago that I'd be invading the secret underground lair of some evil organization bent on mass genocide, I'd have said they were watching way too much anime. Shaking his head at just how weird, amazing, crazy, fantastical, yeah that one work, just how fantastical his life had become. Issei picked up Eitri's gore-smeared hammer, quickly hitting it with a dozen cleaning spells. He started looking over just how many skill level ups he'd earned, plus any new skills he'd acquired along the way. As a result of repeated actions, the skill Heat Resistance has been created. Heat Resistance passive LV1, 0%. Most living creatures must be wary when it comes to heat. Too little and they will freeze, too much and they will rapidly dehydrate or even be burned by the extreme temperatures. However, most dragons have little to fear from all but the most intense of flames. Thanks to the traces of draconic power running through your veins, your body has begun to learn to adapt and gain that same resistance. Passively increases resistance to extreme heat by 1%. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Evade has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Evade has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Evade has leveled up. LV5 LV6. You have auto-looted X10 tungsten fragments and X20 forged steel fragments. Burning Bomb has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Burning Bomb has leveled up. LV7 LV8. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV4 LV5. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Earth Shot has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Earth Shot has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Evade has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Evade has leveled up. LV7 LV8. Rock Missile has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Rock Missile has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Rock Missile has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Lesser MP Regeneration has leveled up. LV1 LV2. As a result of a specific action, the skill Hammer Mastery has been created. Hammer Mastery passive LV1, 0%. Most think of the hammer as a mere tool, but in the past, hammers were actually a fairly common weapon. From the Japanese Otsuchi, to the Totokia from Fiji, to the war hammer used in medieval Europe, the main use of a hammer in combat is to deliver a large amount of force onto a specific point in order to break bones, flesh, and armor. Most hammers intended for combat have a spike on the reverse side of the head to pierce and pry holes in armor. All attacks made with a hammer-type weapon receive +1 damage to their attacks. As a subtype of a club-type weapon, all attacks made with a hammer in combat receive bonuses from the club proficiency skill trees. All hammer-type weapons receive a +5 damage bonus against all types of physical armor worn by humanoid enemies. Congratulations, you have slain Rakania. You receive 550 EXP. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Explosive Combustion Sphere has leveled up. LV7 LV8. Fireball has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Flame Spear has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Boost. Skill has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Boost. Skill has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Boost. Skill has leveled up. LV7 LV8. As a result of a specific action, the skill Dragon Shot has been discovered. Dragon Shot Instant LV1, 0%. An offensive ability common to those who bear the boosted gear, the Dragon Shot requires that the boosted gear be deployed and that use has activated the boost skill at least 3 times, channeling the draconic power generated by the boosted gear into an orb of energy. The user then strikes the orb, releasing the condensed power in the form of a concentrated beam of destructive energy that can become strong enough to blast the top off of a mountain. Requires boosted gear to be used. Requires at least 3 uses of boost to be used. The damage of this attack is the user's maximum MP multiplied by 2, and then multiplied again by the number of boosts as used to trigger its activation. The cost of the use of this skill is 90% of current remaining MP. As a result of a specific action, the skill Explosion has been discovered. Explosion, instant LV1, 0%. One of the base abilities of the boosted gear. When activated, all the power that has been accumulated within the gauntlet through the use of the boost ability is unleashed for a short period of time. With this power awakened, any action that the user makes has its power amplified by the amount of power accumulated within the boosted gear at the time of activation. However, this comes with the downside of activating the reset ability, reverting the boost ability to 0. The cost to activate this skill is equal to half of your current remaining MP. You have slain 97 purifiers of various levels and designations. You gain 24,791 EXP. Congratulations, you have leveled up. LV18 LV19. You have 5 AP to spend. Power Leap has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Ryukin has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Ryukin has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Lesser Barrier Shield has leveled up. LV7 LV8. Earthshot has leveled up. LV7 LV8. As the result of a specific action, the spell Power Throw has been added to your grimoire. Power Throw Instant LV1 0%. Tier 1 Reinforcement Magic Spell. Why just throw things when you can throw them like a rocket? This basic reinforcement magic spell is a minor modification of the Power Strike spell. Instead of releasing the power built up on impact, the power is concentrated and released as the user throws something, drastically increasing the speed and strength of any thrown object. A bit of advice would be to use things that aren't likely to disintegrate due to the air friction and speed of being thrown by this spell. Costs 50 MP per use. Grants plus 10 strength to anything thrown by the user. Restriction. Only works on objects that the user can pick up and lift in one hand. Achievement gained. You have earned the Throwing Like Thor achievement. You gain 500 EXP in the Return Rune Cluster book. Achievement gained. You have earned the Hammer Time achievement. You gain 500 EXP in Spinning Hammer Throw skill book. You have slain Tenkujo Arima. You gain 1000 EXP. You have auto-looted Tenkujo Arima's apartment keys, 5,000 yen and Purifier HQ notification. Well, that's certainly a lot of level ups. Issei murmured, eyes wide for a moment before he shook it off. He'd take a closer look at all his skills later, along with the going through the various skill books and other rewards he'd acquired. Rehooking the newly cleaned and very smug-feeling hammer back onto his belt, Issei took one last look around. The remains of the escape pod actually blended in pretty well with the debris from the collapsing roof. Hopefully anyone investigating would just assume that it was just a junked car that had been left in the warehouse, and that the roof collapsing on it had totaled it beyond recognition. Tenkujo's corpse, on the other hand, had to go. Fireball. As a ball of fire spat out of his idly pointed finger, Issei opened up the gamer's store and used some of his newly acquired gains to purchase another teleportation talisman. Time to go, he muttered before inputting the coordinates and activating it, vanishing from the warehouse in a flash of red light, leaving the burning corpse of Tenkujo Arima to smolder in his wake. Same time, core room, Hyodo Issei's hidden base. Reappearing in the center of his base's core room, Issei blinked in surprise when he heard a couple of frightened yelps from behind him. Turning, he found the 5 people he'd rescued from the Purifier base huddled with backs against the wall. Both Kades and Murayama had actually taken martial arts positions and looked half ready to jump the next thing that moved. Be at ease, he offered, calmly raising a single hand in greeting. It is only me. Abe Kiyomi seemed to study him for a moment before nodding to herself and relaxing slightly. It's actually him, calmly does it, ladies. Issei was more than a bit shocked when he noticed that his senpai was hugging a near catatonic Kuryu with a single arm. Guess getting kidnapped had done a serious number on her. Bastards. Hurting cute girls was forbidden. Are they all dead then? Murayama asked brusquely as she eased up her stance, both she and Kades both looking more than a little wary about him. Their base has been reduced to nothing but a collapsed building within a burnt-out crater. The gamer replied coldly. Nearly every remaining member of the Purifiers within Kyo Town was inside there, and I gave them no opportunity to evacuate. None survived. And any luck, the few that were outside when it occurred will likely flee post-haste now that they have no means of support and know they are being hunted. How can you say something like that so easily? Surprisingly, it wasn't Asia who had spoken up, but rather Kades. The short-haired Pinkette now looked decidedly queasy as she regarded Issei's red armored form. A rather useful side effect of this, Issei answered simply, raising his right arm and allowing the gamer's gear to manifest. Game on. A sacred gear, the Aberis exclaimed in shock. Indeed. However, before I explain in greater detail, Issei turned to face Rudo Nobumasa, who'd been quietly watching from a corner of the room away from the 4 girls. I believe you should drop your disguise, friend. If we're going to do business, then I'd rather it be done to your actual face. I don't. The brown-haired boy tried to protest, eyes darting around nervously. Among other things, this sacred gear of mine allows me to gather information on others simply by observing them, and that include telling me when someone is using some form of power to disguise themselves. The Sekiryude offered impatiently. Now I will not ask politely again. Drop the disguise or I will be forced to remove you from my home. The boy's eyes hardened at that and he tried to stare Issei down for a moment. Sadly, a mix of Issei's menpo and gamer's mind made that an exercise in futility, forcing the smaller being to look away after a moment. Very well then, the child offered shortly as his features began to flow and shimmer. His height didn't change, but that was it. His features smoothed and refined, becoming softer and slightly more feminine, while his clothes transformed from the casual shorts and t-shirt to a pale blue hakama and white kimono top. His eyes shifted from black to a sharp orange while his hair changed from an earthy brown to a bright emerald green as a pair of pointed canine ears emerged from the top of his head, covered in fur the same color as his hair. A pair of long, flowing foxtails, matching his ears and hair in color, emerged from the base of his spine, twisting and curling slightly in the air. Finally, to Issei's eyes only, his name and title changed. Rudoji Mengetsu LV, Special Investigator of Empress Yasaka of the Kyoto Yakai faction, a two-tailed kitsune, and a special investigator in direct service to Her Majesty, Lady Yasaka of Kyoto no less. Issei noted absently, causing the Yakai's brow to twitch. I am curious what someone of your affiliation is doing so deeply in devil territory. A number of Yakai that have either lived nearby or had been passing through the area have been going missing lately. Even stranger, several that have disappeared throughout Japan have briefly been seen in Kyoto recently before disappearing for good. Mengetsu huffed, eyeing the red-armored man carefully. At first we were suspicious that the devils might have been involved. There have been incidents between our factions in the past. I was quite surprised to find those boorish humans were behind this, though how they managed to notice me is still a mystery. Sadly, it does explain what has happened to my missing brethren. He finished with a wince. They've likely been fed to Tenkyujo's meat grinder of research. Once again, any guilt Issei might have felt about ending the bastard and his minions died a cold, shriveled death. The chief scientist in that hellhole had apparently developed a device that could detect and track sacred gears. It's entirely possible he could have built a similar device to detect yoki and similar energies, Issei offered, before shaking his head. But that's beside the point right now. For the moment we have 3 people here who were unaware of the supernatural world before today, namely Kuryu Eika-san, Murayama Keiko-san and Kades Ryako-san. The 3 girls squeaked in surprise, having been stunned silent since the young child they'd shared a cell with turned into a creature straight out of legend, before looking around at the others. Are you all? Kades whispered out, eyes darting between the 3 humans and the kitsune. The only non-human here is Rudoji-san here. Issei reassured the girl, absently nodding his head to the kitsune, whose eyebrow was twitching at Issei's casual use of his real name. Abe Kiyom-san is the heiress of the Abe family, a line that has specialized in taming magical beasts for centuries. Sister Asia Argento is formerly a member of the Roman Vatican, and, like me, possesses a sacred gear. Kiyom preened slightly when he mentioned her family. Then again, her family was apparently fairly well known in the supernatural circles, so it must be a point of pride for her. What are these sacred gear things you keep talking about? You said that weird gauntlet you made appear was one, right? Murayama asked, eyeing said gauntlet suspiciously. The Sekiryude sighed slightly. Evidently this was going to take some time. The first thing that you must now understand now is that many of the legends that exist in this world, from the stories of Yakai and other monsters to the legends of various ancient pantheons of gods, all hold at least some kernels of truth. This includes the legends of the biblical god, angels, both fallen and pure, and devils. The God of the Bible is considered one of the most benevolent of the ancient divinities because, ages ago, he created countless objects of power, the sacred gears, and gifted them onto humanity as a whole in order to help protect them from the more naturally dangerous members of the supernatural world. Sister Argento bears Twilight Healing, a powerful healing type sacred gear that can mend most injuries on any being its user desires, while I possess the Gaia Gamer's gear, which allows me various abilities, and is considered one of the strongest there is, just below the 13 Longinus, which is a collection of the 13 strongest sacred gears in existence. Then who are those people and why did they kidnap us? Kuryu asked, her voice still quivering slightly. Those people, Issei practically spat the word, were a branch of an organization known as the Purifiers. They are a collection of normal humans who have learned of the supernatural and, for one reason or another ranging from personal trauma to simple fear and loathing, have come to despise it and everything associated with it. They abhor the supernatural in all its states, from supernatural creatures like the Yakai to even fellow humans who can practice magic or possess unique abilities like sacred gear holders. If I were to guess, you 3 likely fall into one of those categories. Then ... that's ridiculous. Kuryu snarled out, her glasses flashing. Don't you think that if we had some kind of special powers, we'd have used them to defend ourselves? You might simply not have awakened it yet, Eika-chan. Kiyom offered gently. Sacred gears sometimes require very specific circumstances to awaken, where you might simply have a natural talent for magic or some other mystic discipline that requires training to use properly. Issei nodded. That is true. If you'd like, I can use one of my abilities to try and find the exact reason, he offered patiently. It is your decision, Kuryu-san, I will not force it on you. Eika looked between the heiress and the armored mage, blinking rapidly for a moment, before closing her eye and giving a quick nod. Do it, she growled out. Issei merely nodded and turned to face her fully. Observe, he called out calmly. He already knew that Kuryu had a sacred gear, but he was curious to see which one she had. Name, Kuryu Eika. Title, Female Perverted Glasses, Erotic Girl. Level, 10. HP, 100. MP, 345 sealed. STR, 10. STA, 10. Dex, 15. INT, 23. Wise, 15-10 from seal. Luck, 10. Shaw, 10. Special statuses. Partially sealed sacred gear unusable. MP sealed. Wise, -10. Perverted girl -5% to relationship gains with non-perverted boys. Wounded heart boys have -15% relationship gains with Kuryu Eika. Sacred gear, staring red subspecies variant sealed. Infamous among the first-year students at Kyo Academy, Kuryu Eika is said to be able to guess the length of a boy's penis at a glance, and uses this ability to ruthlessly pop overinflated egos among her male classmates. Beneath the seemingly joking and fun-loving exterior, however, is a fragile girl who is recovering from being almost assaulted by a man in the summer holidays before she started to attend Kyo Academy. That's ... wow ... I never knew. Issei thought in shock. Who knew that the girl who kept making fun of Madohama and Matsuda had gone through something like that? Quickly shaking away such thoughts until later, he addressed the bespectacled girl solemnly. Well, that's quite interesting. You do possess a sacred gear, Kuryu-san. To be precise, you hold a subspecies variant of the sacred gear staring red. Though someone, and I'm afraid I don't know who, has attempted to seal your sacred gear and your ability to use magic. Does anyone have any knowledge on this particular sacred gear? I do. Asia offered quietly, raising her hand and quickly drawing the attention of the others in the room. Blushing under the attention, Asia continued as best she could. Staring red is supposed to be a fairly common sacred gear. It is a part of a set of 7 species of sacred gears known as the Staring 7 Lights. They're all bows formed out of light in the gear's native color, and each possesses the ability to fire arrows of light at their target. I think it is also called the light red arrow ... Did you say that it's a subspecies? Indeed, there is no doubt about it. Issei confirmed with a sharp nod. Why is that important? Kuryu growled out. Her mind was reeling and whirling from everything she'd heard. For the most part, all sacred gears retain the form that the Lord originally crafted them into, only changing once the balance breaker is invoked. The nun explained with a nervous expression. A balance breaker is ... It's supposed to be awakening of a sacred gear's fullest potential, surpassing all its previous limits, activated by the strength of the bearer's emotions. In most cases, balance breakers share a common shape just as their originals do. But ... But I've heard that it isn't uncommon for unique and new forms of balance breakers to be unlocked. Any balance breaker that varies dynamically in either appearance or power from the most common form is called a subspecies. But I've only ever heard of subspecies appearing in balance breakers, never while the sacred gear is in its base form. It's simply unheard of, and, most likely, why Kuryu-san was sealed in the first place. Kiyom offered with a frown. An all too likely possibility, but I'm afraid another matter takes precedence now. Kuryu-san, you now have a choice you will need to make before too long. Issei put, turning to address the flaxen-haired girl directly. I believe the reason that the purifiers were able to detect you is because the seal is only partially complete. In other words, there is a gap that allowed them to detect the presence of your sacred gear despite the seal. Whether this is due to the seal being damaged or merely incomplete is something I'm not sure of. However, I can offer you 2 solutions to this problem. The first is that I can, in all likelihood, acquire an item that can complete the seal, making your sacred gear undetectable but rendering it inaccessible to you. The second is that I can attempt to fully undo the seal, allowing you to fully manifest it and learn to use it to defend yourself. You should unseal it, girly. Ningetsu offered offhandedly from where he'd been quietly observing the group. Better to have power and hopefully never need use it than to someday need it and not of it. It's her choice and hers alone, Issei replied, tossing a censoring look over his shoulder at the kitsune, who merely tisked and looked away. Personally, he agreed with the pretty boy fox, but it wasn't his choice. Just like when he'd unlocked his gaming gear, Kuryu had to make the decision to move forward herself. Like hell, I'm going to let myself be treated like that again. The bespectacled girl snapped out. Get this damn seal off of me now, armor boy. Issei smiled. If that is your wish, I'll need to take a closer look at the seal first then. Give me one moment. He agreed with a nod, tapping the appropriate location on the window only he could see. Partially sealed. Tier 1. Kuryueka has had the vast majority of her sacred gear sealed away, only allowing for faint traces of its aura to escape. Due to imperfections in the seal's placement, this has negatively affected her wise stat and was further weakened by an incident that should have naturally awakened her sacred gear. The seal is not attached to a particular section of her body and can be broken using either a Tier 2 seal breaker spell or a specific counter talisman. Well, that answers one question. The seal was not placed correctly, that's why it's only been partially effective. It also seems to be having a detrimental effect on your thought processes. Better get it off as quickly as possible, he informed Kuryu, who paled at the idea of the seal affecting her brain and started nodding rapidly, opening up the gamer's store and did a quick lookup on seal breakers. The results were several spellbooks and a number of talismans, deciding against buying the spellbook since it was both 10 times as expensive as a single-use talisman and he didn't have the requirements to use it. He needed to know at least 3 Tier 1 counter magic spells to learn the Tier 2 seal breaker spell. He quickly purchased a Tier 2 seal breaker talisman, causing a small paper tag to appear in his hand. Walking closer, he held it up in front of Kuryu. Hold still ... This may sting a bit. Wah. Kuryu started to speak only to be cut off as Issei activated the Tier 2 seal breaker talisman, causing it to glow with a bright green-yellow light, before tossing it at her. The paper seemed to dissolve into a mode of yellow light moment before it engulfed the bespectacled girl, making her flinch slightly for a second as a sound akin to shattering glass filled the air, the aura dissolving and dispersing as her eyes glazed over for a moment. Her left arm suddenly shot out, a bow of bright red light taking form in her hand for a brief moment before it seemed to melt and engulf her entire arm before a bright flare of red filled the room. Incredible. Kiyomi breathed under her breath as the light faded, revealing Kuryu's newly reformed sacred gear. Her entire arm was covered in what looked like lamellar armor made of plates of pure, concentrated red light, and attached to the base of her wrist was the bow itself, only now it too had been changed. Before it had looked like a traditional longbow, now it looked more like a Mongol composite bow, shorter but with a pronounced set of recurves. Issei absently took another look at her screen to see if anything had changed. Her wise penalty was gone, bringing it back up to 15, and her mana was unsealed as well. Finally, the name of her scared gear had changed. Sacred gear, staring armored red subspecies sacred gear. It seems the talisman worked as needed, he announced aloud. The seal has been removed and your sacred gear, staring armored red, has been fully unlocked, Kuryu-san. Wow. Kuryu mumbled out, eyes wide and clear once again as she stared at her sacred gear. This is awesome. You should start practicing activating and deactivating it at will. It's a fairly simple process that should become second nature with a little effort, Issei advised. Though considering that it's been sealed for a while, you might have a bit of trouble putting it away at first. Nodding absently, the bespectacled girl moved aside and started to practice activating and deactivating her sacred gear. Now, I believe that leaves you too. If you are willing, I can do the same for you as well, Issei offered, turning his attention to Murayama and Kades. The two Kendoka shared a brief glance before returning their focus to him and both nodding sharply in unison. Very well. One moment, the red-armored boy agreed, activating observe on the pair of them. That's new. What? Murayama asked nervously. As the name of my sacred gear suggests, it allows me to see and interact with the world as if it was more akin to a game, Issei offered casually. The power I'm using is similar to a scanning and profiling ability found in most forms of RPGs to give the player information on characters, items, and other such things. Normally, humans only have 2 gauges when I use this ability on them, HP and MP, which represent their physical health and magical energy respectively. However, you both possess a 3rd gauge, SP, or spirit points. Apparently, you both possess spiritual powers born from your ancestors being powerful Miko, exorcists, priests, or what have you. You two should likely take a close look at your family histories after this ... if you choose to remember this incident. What do you mean by that? Kades asked sharply. The supernatural world must be kept a secret, Kades-san. Surprisingly, it was Kiyomi who spoke up here. It is the one rule that the entirety of our world ascribes to, that the supernatural must remain hidden or it will inevitably lead to disaster. Revealing its existence to anyone is an action that must be taken with extreme care and caution. Huo Town is the territory of the devil clans, and they make extensive use of hypnotic magics to wipe the memory of anyone who chances upon the supernatural. If either of you feel that you cannot keep the secret, then I would assume our savior here can procure some sort of memory suppression device to seal your memories of today's events. Abe-senpai. Murayama looked taken aback. Kiyom sighed tiredly. I am the heiress of a household of human magic users. Murayama-san, I've been a part of the supernatural for my entire life, and this lesson has been repeated to me for just as long. We must keep the secret of the world as that, lest even more people like these purifiers show themselves. Those who would either seek to control or destroy that which they cannot control or understand. And what about Hayato? He's not exactly a magic user. Kades protested. Issei-san is. Asia interjected. He knew about the purifiers and told me a little about them before I was captured. How did ... wait ... Kiyom said slowly, before pausing to think. Hayato-kun and his parents were taken hostage by a madman just recently. It's how he got that scar on his cheek from when he fought back. Was that done by a purifier? A rogue operative? Yes, Issei confirmed, nodding his head. Like the three of you, Hayato-san possessed a hidden potential that he was unaware of. I was actually pursuing the man who took Issei's family hostage and assisted in their rescue. Afterwards, I was forced to explain the existence of the supernatural to him, much as I have done for you. Since then, he has been training in order to both utilize his abilities and protect himself and his family should another attempt be made on them. Training that he put to use in his attempts to protect Sister Argento from the men who were sent to capture her, even if he was ultimately defeated. The boy has been working to keep his abilities a secret, even from his own parents, and I am certain he would like to keep any mention of his involvement in this incident a secret as well in order to protect his family from further reprisal from the purifiers. If today has proved anything, it is that they have no scruples in attempting to accomplish their goals. Mangetsu shrugged amiably. Considering I've never so much as seen the boyo, I don't have any issue with that, particularly since I might be strapped to a dissection table right now if he hadn't brought you in. I'll amend my report to IsseiXHarem and state that you were hired by an unknown third party. I will as well. Asia nodded. I suppose it is the least we can do in return for his part in our rescue. Kiyom nodded. Oh Hayato. Sure, I won't mention him. Kuryu offered absent-mindedly as she continued toying with her sacred gear. Fine. Murayama grumbled after a moment, before pouting. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised something weird happened, considering he hasn't been his usual perverted self recently. Is she sounding wistful about me peeking on her? Issei thought incredulously. Okay, it's official, I do not understand girls. For realizing this oh so obvious point, you gain +1 wise. Stupid wise-ass sacred gear. Kade sim, he said, suppressing the urge to facepalm at his snaky sacred gear. Alright already. The pinkette huffed, not liking the fact that she was the only one left. You said that the people in charge on the supernatural side around here are devils or something, right? Who are they? I'm not entirely certain that I should divulge that information. Issei said carefully. While you have agreed to keep the supernatural a secret, the identities of the devil rulers of Kyo Town aren't my secret to divulge. So you do know who they are. The kendo captain narrowed her eyes. Yes, I have a fairly open contract with them while I remain in their territory. The Sekiryude responded easily. In exchange for the ability to operate freely in their territory, I keep my eye out for anyone looking to cause trouble or start other issues. And before you say it, the purifiers tend to rely on non-supernatural means to operate, which makes them extremely difficult to track down using the devil's usual methods, so they had no way of knowing about their presence here. They were just another bunch of humans in a city of thousands. Besides, as I said earlier, the structure that I blew up was their last stronghold in the city. Hopefully that means it'll be a while before we have to deal with those crazy bastards again. Aren't devils supposed to be ... bad? Kuryu asked, looking a little tired. She'd managed to successfully summon and dismiss her sacred gear 5 times now, but the experience, combined with everything else that happened today, were obviously draining her. They are in opposition to our Lord. Asia agreed, but looked troubled. She was likely remembering the devil she had healed which had caused her exile. I've honestly had more issues with the fallen angels than the devils, at least those in Kyo anyway. Issei responded with an absent shrug, making Asia's head snap towards him. I fought and almost killed a fallen who had infiltrated the purifiers. She was trying to restart the Great War of the 3 biblical factions by having the devil rulers of Kyo murdered, and their deaths blamed on the fallen hiding in the old Kyo church. Considering that the local rulers are related to 2 of the rulers of the entire devil race, it would have happened faster than Kuryu-san's bow could harm a devil. Huh? The bespectacled girl blinked in incomprehension. Devils are born primarily with the shadow element. Kiyomi explained helpfully. The light element is the natural opposite of the shadow, and thus act as one of its greatest weaknesses. Particularly weak devils can't even go into regular sunlight without being weakened. Pure light weaponry, such as the type used as arrows in Kuryu-san's sacred gear, is one of their natural banes, only surpassed by items blessed with the holy element. So some of these sacred gear things are specifically designed to deal with specific enemies, Kuryu said thoughtfully. In a sense, Issei nodded. The God of the Bible created the original sacred gears to help protect humanity from its enemies and predators. It's only natural that he'd include those that oppose him in heaven as enemies. In fact, 2 of the 3 holy relics, which are widely considered the most powerful of the 13 Longinus, are particularly dangerous to devils. The true Longinus, the weapon that pierced the body of Jesus Christ, is an incredibly powerful holy weapon that can project immense amounts of both light and holy energy. Incinerate Anthem, the cross on which Jesus Christ was crucified on, is capable of creating and manipulating immense amounts of holy fire. The third, Sephiroth Graal, the literal Holy Grail, is an extremely powerful healing, regeneration, and resurrection sacred gear. He was really grateful that he'd looked up the information about the other 13 Longinus using his gamer's gear after D-Drake had mentioned them once before. Issei shook his head before coughing into his fist. I believe we've discussed all that needs to be said for now, and it's getting late. If none of you are harmed, I will teleport you all to a safe location in Kyoto so you can all return home. I'm honestly surprised you haven't even tried to keep us from speaking to anyone about your base here. Kiyomi noted curiously. And what could you tell them about it? You know that I have a base and that it is underground. I highly doubt you've been able to figure out precisely where it is. Issei replied blandly with a smirk under his menpo, causing Kiyomi to blush slightly as she realized his point. Grinding up the gamer's store to purchase another talisman, he continued. Sister Argento, Hyodo-san wanted to see you himself as soon as possible once you were safe. If you wouldn't mind staying behind, I'll take you to him. Oh, of course, the blonde nun responded, nodding eagerly. Within a few moments, the group of schoolgirls and one kitsune vanished from the base, leaving only him and a nervous nun. Well, now that they're gone, I suppose it's best to rip off the band-aid, Issei muttered, reaching up and removing his helmet. Asia's eyes widened in shock as the helmeted visor of her rescuer disappeared to reveal the face of her friend. Issei offered the girl a nervous smile as he waved a still armored hand. Hey, Asia. Sorry it took so long for me to get to you. He trailed off. Issei. Sam, the emerald-eyed nun stammered out in shock. You saved me. Well, I wasn't about to let those purifiers do whatever they wanted with you. The boy huffed. The thought of that bastard Tenkyujo Arima getting his hands on Asia made his blood boil with outrage. In an instant, Asia had disappeared from her spot, reappearing with her arms wrapped tightly around Issei, crying into his chest. All of the stress, worry, and fear from the last few hours finally overcoming her ability to hold it together now that she knew that she was safe in the presence of her friend. Issei himself started panicking for a moment as he was hugged for the first time in his life to the best of his knowledge, by a female other than his mother. After a moment of panic, he managed to get his head back on straight and gently hugged the Italian blonde back, gently rubbing her back. That only seemed to make the girl cry harder as she desperately clung to him. It took a few minutes for Asia to collect herself, and Issei bought a box full of tissue to let her dry her eyes. Thank you, Asia sniffed. Did you know I would be kidnapped today, Issei-san? No, Issei responded instantly, much to her relief. I knew we were being followed shortly after we met, but I didn't know who it was until those purifiers jumped us. I had a tracking spell placed on your necklace in case something happened, but... Asia closed her eyes. You could have fought back and defeated the men who kidnapped me ... but you didn't. Why? Issei bit back his initial excuse before taking a deep breath and trying to explain his reasoning. They kidnapped you in broad daylight in a public park, Asia. Yes, they used some sort of magical device to keep people from noticing it, but that was still an incredibly bold, incredibly risky move. If they were willing to take such a big risk once, then that meant they likely wouldn't stop at just one person ... and I was right, wasn't I? They'd already captured Murayama, Cat Ace and the others. I had to stop them before they did this to anyone else. Now, the Purifiers have lost all of their bases inside of Kyoto Town. Most of the men they had here are gone. And you and the others are unharmed and unmolested ... They're a bit shaken up, yes, but not harmed other than maybe a bruise or two. How are you so calm about this? Asia asked tremulously. The gamer sighed again, before tapping the blue gauntlet still engulfing his right arm. You can blame this thing for that. The gamer's gear or gaming gear, whichever you'd prefer, grants its wielder two main abilities when it initially activates. The first is called the gamer's body, an ability that basically allows me to live my life as if I were a video game character. If I'm cut, I don't bleed, I just lose HP. I can't lose a limb or anything like that unless an enemy specifically tries to target something, and that just causes a debuff effect. My life force is literally quantified as my HP. As long as I have HP, I'm still alive. If I ever lose all my HP... game over, I die. Shaking his head at that rather morbid summation of his life, Issei continued. But it's the second skill that is causing the issue, Asia. It's called the gamer's mind. I see. The nun blinked, wrapping her mind around such a strange sacred gear. And what does it do? I'll admit, it's a really useful ability, Issei admitted with a small, grim smile. Fear, panic, insanity, mental degradation, mind control... That skill renders me completely immune to all of those. It even tampers down my negative emotions so I don't act too rashly, like anger and hatred. Even in the worst possible situation, I'll be able to think calmly and rationally. Here his smile turned into a grimace, but the side effect is that it does the same thing to all of my emotions. Excitement, joy, happiness... If I feel any emotion too strongly, then it activates, and they're smacked down. Asia paled at that. To have your emotions chained like that, it was a horrible concept. She whispered out. Ever since I awoke the gamer's gear, I've been forced to look at the world in a certain way, always keeping a logical and rational standpoint, with my emotions under firm control. The gamer admitted tiredly, turning his gaze to momentarily linger on his arm. It's almost like this damn thing is trying to condition me for something. I've been becoming more and more used to reigning in my own emotions before gamer's mind can even activate and forcefully suppress them. At taking a step back from them whenever I plan or make a decision... Just like when the Purifiers showed up. I could have handled all of those thugs without breaking a sweat. But I don't have an ability that'd let me follow a van speeding down the street at full speed, or one that'd let me read their minds to find where they'd come from. So I made the logical decision, doing what was best to accomplish my long-term goals and needs. But that decision also resulted in you being put in a terrible situation, and went against everything I wanted. I'm so sorry, Asia. For all his faults, Hyodo Issei had never been someone to shy away from his own mistakes. Even his worst detractors at Kyo Academy would, however begrudgingly, admit that Issei would always be the first person to admit that he'd gone too far or made some mistake. It was one of the few things that most of the girls actually found redeeming about him. Asia simply stared at the form of her friend and savior with a mix of shock, awe, and more than a small bit of pity. As a foundling of the Catholic Church, she had been raised in a particular way, one that enforced the Lord's good book as if it was law. But it had always been a matter of choice. She'd never been forced to think or believe in a certain way. Yes, those of the church had done their best to guide and lead her and the others down their path. Asia was naive but not stupid. She knew that her home had helped shape her into who she was, but she had always had the ability to break away from those lessons if she chose to. But Issei-san... his own sacred gear is taking that choice from him. He cannot help but become more cold and logical under its influence. She thought sadly. Her twilight healing, the smile of the Holy Mother, had never been able to affect her in such a way. As far as she knew, the recovery-type sacred gear had no will or personality of its own, unlike some other forms of sacred gear. It might have been the cause of her exile, but only because she had used it to heal a devil, leaving her adrift and lonely. He went against his own desires to carry out his plan... Does that mean he wanted to stop me from being kidnapped from the start? This was a very conflicting situation for the young nun. Yes, she had been kidnapped because of the plan Issei had followed in spite of his own intentions. But had Issei not gone through with it, then 5 other innocent souls would have likely suffered a far more horrible fate in her stead. At its heart, Issei's plan had been born to save and protect as many people as possible... Was that not a good and righteous thing? Then there was the fact that Issei was clearly conflicted and remorseful over his own actions, was suffering because he had caused her pain. There really was no choice for Asia, so she chose to follow the path she had always walked. I forgive you, Issei-san, Asia offered gently. Issei's eyes, which had been locked on the floor since his guilt-ridden admission, shot up to meet hers. You came to save me, and despite everything your heart was in the right place. Everyone was able to escape that horrible place because of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was so scared... Not even praying to the Lord made me calm down. Fresh tears gathered in her eyes as she remembered the sneers and glares from the men that had taken her prisoner, the rough handling before being thrown into that horrible cell. the scent of old, dried blood and a faint, palpable feeling of remnant agony filling the air, a mystic residue left behind by all the poor souls that had met their end in that terrible place. In addition to her sacred gear, Asia had always possessed a certain sensitivity to mystical and spiritual matters, so much so that she'd been marked as a potential recruit for exorcist training before her sacred gear had emerged and her value had changed. There was a reason that even back in Rome, she'd rarely left her church. While the quaint little church she'd been raised and lived in had been relatively free of those remnant emotions, Asia could barely wander around Rome itself without wandering into some remnant of the myriad of tragedies and horrors that had befallen the holy city over its long history. A single, armored finger gently swept away the tears before they could fall. She looked up to find Issei standing in front of her, eyes kind but hard in determination. Asia, I promise, no matter what this stupid gear does to me, I will always come to save you if you're ever in danger. Issei-san, Asia whispered, tears brimming up again, but for a very different reason. No one had ever said anything like that to her. The paladins and exorcists in the service of the church had guarded her out of duty or faith, never out of personal concern for her. She was the holy maiden, a symbol of the faith to be protected, not a person to be cared for. Hey now, we just dried those tears. Issei offered her a soft, teasing smile. Then a serious look crossed his face. Asia, I can't let you go back to that church ... if the fallen there are cut from the same cloth as that crazy Armeros by. Woman, it's obvious that you aren't safe or happy there. The nun tried to swallow down her emotions at that. But where else can I go? Even if ... if Lady Rainier and Lady Middlet are so cold. Even if Lord Donaseek and Lady Calawarner look down on me and bully me. I have nowhere else. I can't go home ... back to Rome. Issei growled slightly under his breath, mentally adding 4 new names to his shit list. Forcing the emotional spike down, Issei did his best to smile for her. Watch this, he told her, walking over to his base core and placing his hand on it in concentration. Seconds passed before Asia suddenly let out a little leap of surprise as the wall to one side of them rippled, a normal-looking wooden door seemingly forming out of nowhere. I made this hidden base for several reasons, Asia. As a place I could work on stuff involving the supernatural and private, and as a safe house for me and my family if something happens or my identity is revealed and we need to lay low. The gamer explained as he lowered his hand from the core before taking hers in his own and leading her over to the door and gently opening it. Inside was an entirely new room that none was fairly certain hadn't been there before. There was a freshly made bed, a small table, a rug on the floor and a single crucifix mounted on the wall. There was also a bookcase next to the bed filled with all sorts of books, in Italian to boot. The room was illuminated with a single crystal mounted in the center of the ceiling, its light soothing and gentle. Issei-sen ... this is. Asia whispered out in silent awe. I can expand this place as much as I like by drawing in, accumulating, and using mana from the surrounding landscape. And I can make just about anything in here as long as I can buy the blueprints in the gamer's store. So making a room like this is easy. Issei offered softly. It isn't much, but I can change it however you like, and it'll be much bigger in a few weeks. If you want to ... you're welcome to stay here. I can stay here? Asia asked, not able to comprehend what was being offered to her. A safe haven. A home. Really? Her heart was being torn. She had already lost the only home she'd ever really known. Rome and the Catholic Church had been her world. She'd had joined the Grigori so easily because, fallen or not, they were still the Lord's angels. To join another faction would have been to turn her back on the Lord, to truly fall from grace. But it was also because she truly had little in the way of options. A lone sacred gear holder, particularly one with no true combat ability and yet such high value like her Twilight healing, would be an easy and tempting target to any less than upright individual. Excommunicated and exiled from the only place she had known, she was alone in world. Or she had been. Now Issei-san, the person who had never done anything but treat her with kindness since she'd set foot in Kyo town and had even braved a fortress of wicked men in order to save her, was extending his hand again and offering her sanctuary in his home away from home. But Lady Rainier might come for me. I'm under her command, Asia said, as her mind spun through all the possible bad things that could happen to Issei because of her. Let her try. Even if they could find this place, my base has its own defenses to deal with uninvited guests. If she and her friends come looking for you, I think they'll end up biting a lot more than they can chew. Issei responded with a grim smile. I've already managed to force a fallen into retreat, Armeros the Lesser, and I'm a lot stronger now than I was back then. This time I'll know just what I'm facing long before they can reach us. This time they'll be fighting on my ground and my terms. Trust me, Asia. And she did. She trusted him wholeheartedly. It was strange to trust someone she had only known for a handful of hours, she knew. But something within her told Asia that Hyodo Issei would help and protect her, not because her sacred gear might be useful, but just because he wanted to. I'll be in your care then, Issei-san. Asia bowed towards him, making the gamer hurriedly copy her. Likewise, Asia, he said with a smile. Later, after Asia retired to bed, exhausted both physically and mentally from the events of the day, Issei bought a chest of drawers and had the dungeon absorb and reproduce minus the dirt all of Asia's clothing to fill it. He also added some casual clothes in her size so she didn't have to wear a nun's habit all the time. Status, he said as he lounged on another new purchase of his, a large, comfortable chair throne that had the base core positioned above it at the back of the room. Name, Hyodo Issei. Class, the gamer. Level, 19. Next level, 35% EXP. Title, Oppai Baka. HP, 950 over 950. MP, 775 over 775. STR, 165. STA, 161. Dex, 171. INT, 56. Wise, 58. Luck, Cha, 88. LD, 10. AP, 5. Whistling slightly as he got a look at his physical stats, Issei quickly dumped 2 of his AP into Wise and 3 into INT. The imbalance between his physical and mental stats was starting to get a bit ridiculous, and that was with him putting almost every point of a P he earned into his mental stats. He really needed to find some skills or status that would boost his mental growth the same way boosted gear was bolstering his physical growth. Dismissing the thought for now, the Sekiryude opened up the interface with his base and stared grimly at the map of the first and only floor that was projected in front of him. If he was going to keep Asia safe from the Fallen, then he was going to need more. A lot more. The distant priority of upgrading his base's defenses had shifted into an absolute necessity due to the gentle blonde resting in her new room. He needed more guardians, and stronger ones too, if he wanted them to be able to at least keep the bastards away from her until he could teleport into the base and take control of the defenses himself. While he'd played a few games like Dungeon Keeper and the like, that particular genre was unfortunately smaller than one would imagine, and he'd never had as much interest in them as he had with RPGs, eroge, and gouge games. Still, he had to try. Trial and error were the only ways he going to learn with this. Monsters, traps, tricks, and bosses ... He'd have to get a handle on all of it quick like. Knowing his luck, the Fallen weren't going to be content to sit on their rears and wait for Asia to come back on her own. Well now, I guess we'd better get this game started then, he muttered as he reached forward and started his preparations.